Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto was half-blood ninja and Percy Jackson. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by HistorianoftheKais and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Arashi Kazama opened the door to Konoha's hospital with his only hand and joined the line of people walking to the information desk. He ignored the looks people were giving at the missing lower half of his right arm. It was an old wound unlike all the fresh wounds that people had who were almost overfilling the hospital. As Arashi waited in line he spotted some old comrades sporting wounds that would force them out of the force. He made a note to talk to them about coping with the wounds and living your life after you were forced to undergo a medial discharge. Soon Arashi reached the tired lady at the desk who said, "State your business." She spotted Arashi's old wound and said, "Sir, unless your chronic condition has become life-threatening, I'm going to have to ask you to come back later if you're seeking medical treatment." Between Danzo's insurrection and the Kyuubi attack, all medical personnel are focusing on triage and life-threatening cases. Arashi shook his head and said, "I didn't come here for treatment. I came to check in on a former teammate of mine and her family. She and her husband were supposed to be having their first child earlier today. I heard rumors that they ended up in the fight and are most likely dead." The rumors part was complete bullshit, but Arashi could still lie like a shinobi should. He knew Kushina was dead. The Kyuubi wouldn't have been released while she lived. However, he couldn't let the secretary know top secret information. The secretary frowned and said, "You have my condolences, sir. However, if you came to visit their bodies, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Identification of the dead isn't scheduled to start for another day if things go well. Also, we are not allowing visitors due to the high volume of injured." She motioned to the couches and floor of the waiting area that was full of lightly injured people. "I'm not here to see them. I came to check on their child. Hopefully, my former teammate and her husband are alive getting treated. If not, well, either way someone will need to look after the little one until things can get properly sorted. That is something I can help you with, sir. I will need to see some identification for you along with your former teammate's name." The secretary knew that the hospital would be stretched trying to take care of all the orphans until the proper chain of custody for them was worked out. Arashi's request would help them out with at least one child. Long-term teammates and former teammates were considered by Konoha to be the default guardian of orphan shinobi children if the parents didn't have a will or their clan couldn't look after the child. Arashi reached into his pocket and pulled out his retired shinobi license. He then said, "My former teammate's name is Kushina Uzumaki and her husband's name is Minato Uzumaki. I'm not sure if the child has been officially named given the circumstances. However, I do know they were considering Naruto if it was a boy and Ritsuka if the child was a girl." The secretary nodded her head and began to type their names into her computer. It never ceased to amaze Arashi how people failed to connect Minato's official name since his wedding to his legendary status as the Yellow Flash or as the Hokage. But then again, people were entranced with the mystique of a civilian-born shinobi from an obscure merchant clan rising to become a titan of the age. He will probably always be Minato Namikaze in the public's mind. Suddenly the secretary blurted out, "What the hell? Information blackout, the attack must have messed up our computer systems as well, sir." The new voice cut in. "All information regarding Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Uzumaki is currently under a blackout per orders of the Sandaime Hokage, who has resumed emergency control of Konoha." Arashi and the secretary turned to see an Anbu nearby. Everyone tensed, still wary of any sleeper agents of Danzo. The Anbu agent held up his hands keeping them far away from each other so that he couldn't make seals. That action eased the tension in the hospital room. Arashi eased it further when he said, "That makes some sense. Both Kushina and Minato handled high-level material in their duties." The Anbu nodded his head and said, "Given the information blackout, you won't be able to find anything on your former teammate's family here. Would you please head to the Hokage's tower? The Sandaime is there and looking for all former ninjas who can help. Perhaps you can assist in some of the bureaucratic duties during this crisis." Arashi nodded his head accepting the instructions. He quickly reclaimed his license and headed to the Hokage tower. Getting to the tower was time-consuming given the ruins Konoha was in because of Danzo's actions. Arashi knew the old ninja was into some dark stuff, but this was beyond his imagination of what that warhawk would or even could ever do. Once Arashi reached the tower he was faced with a bit of a hassle getting in to help. Not that he could blame the guards for double-checking everything given the circumstances. It just was annoying for both him and the guards. Arashi was surprised that once his license was checked he was ushered up to the top of the tower where the Hokage's office was located. He had been expected to be sent to an admin chunin or turned away due to his condition. Hiruzen was sitting behind the Hokage desk in his pajamas looking perfectly at home and without a care of how ridiculous it all looked. The reactivated Hokage turned to look at Arashi and said, I understand that you have been inquiring after your former teammate's child. Arashi stood at attention and crisply replied, correct sir. I know that both Kushina and Minato are dead because of the attack, although I don't know the specifics yet. As Kushina's former teammate, I wanted to look after their child if the little one survived until I could sort things out with whoever is the new regent of the Uzumaki clan. The formerly retired Hokage sighed and said, that's part of the problem, Mr. Kazama. The traitor's forces targeted the Uzumaki clan in the insurrection as a high priority target. He probably wanted to ensure that the Kyuubi couldn't be resealed into any container but the one he had selected. The Uzumaki clan has been reduced to 2 members, both of whom are less than a year old. Art of Arashi didn't want to believe it. The Uzumakis had been targeted for extermination twice in a generation. The fall of Uzushio had been hard enough on the clan, but the survivors had managed to make it to Konoha in an amazing saga of perils and success. The survivors had been welcomed by their steadfast allies. Everyone had been ashamed they were unable to help the village's steadfast ally in its time of need and desperately wanted to do their part to clear away the collective shame their failure brought. Arashi even remembered hearing rumors of some fistfights by some of the clan heads over who could offer the best supplies to help the clan get re-established in Konoha. Determination steeled Arashi's resolve. He owed the Uzumakis and Kushina too much to abandon them in their time of need. The former Chunin spoke in a firm voice. Who are the survivors? Hiruzen sighed and said, newborn Naruto Uzumaki and young Karen Uzumaki are the only survivors. Naruto Uzumaki is Kushina and Minato's son while Arashi cut the Hokage off and said, I claim temporary custody of Naruto Uzumaki as Kushina Uzumaki's only surviving teammate until her and Minato's will can be found and executed. I'm willing to take Karen Uzumaki in until her guardianship is established, unless her parents have any surviving teammates that would like to contest it. In that case, I will concede to their rights. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes and questioned. Why do you want custody of Karen Uzumaki? There was an edge to the Hokage's voice that Arashi wasn't used to in the old leader. Arashi replied, you said that there were only 2 survivors of the Uzumaki clan. If I take care of Naruto, it would only make sense for me to take care of Karen as well. Clan members should be kept together. The soul-piercing look Hiruzen was sending Arashi baffled the discharged ninja. Keeping orphan clan members together was standard practice. One didn't try to separate someone from their kin. Arashi remembered certain facts and quickly made a deduction as to why his leader was grilling him over something so basic. Wait a minute. Don't tell me that Minato sealed the Kyuubi inside of Karen. Why would he do that when he had a child of his own? That's not like Minato at all. Hiruzen sighed, having determined that Arashi could be trusted. From what I understand, Minato's original plan was to seal away the Kyuubi in Naruto. Ichigo Uzumaki offered his daughter instead, arguing that the next Jinchuriki should have their parents around to help them deal with the challenges. There were also some anomalies with Naruto that made it too dangerous to risk sealing the Biju in him when there was another option. Minato used a forbidden jutsu to summon the Shinigami to rip the Kyuubi in half, sealing half of it away in the Shinigami. This was to make the Kyuubi safer to seal away in such a young child. By the time the Biju regenerates its strength, young Karen will be in her mid to late teens and able to handle its power. Sir, what happened to young Karen's parents? Ichigo died from wounds received from protecting Minato, Naruto, and Karen from some of Danzo's men who attacked while Minato did the sealing. I don't know why they attacked, since from what we can tell Minato had already killed Danzo by that point. He passed away moments after help arrived and he was able to give us a brief report. As for Orihime Uzumaki, she regrettably died from extreme chakra exhaustion, trying to heal as many critically injured shinobi as she could. Why did the Uzumakis have to be so bullheadedly stubborn to their detriment? Sensei had always described the Uzumaki as a rowdy bunch that one could mistake for samurai instead of ninjas with how they typically acted. However, he also said that they were the most loyal comrades one could ask for, who would die with a smile if their death could save a friend. It was a good thing that it was typically very hard to kill in Uzumaki. At least the Uzumaki clan made it as killers paid dearly for their deaths. Hiruzen didn't have the total figures yet. However, he did know that several thousand shinobi and civilian lives had been saved at the cost of slightly less than 24 Uzumaki lives. Between this and the fall of Uzushio, the Uzumaki had probably set the standard by which all shinobi clans facing imminent demise were going to be judged by history. Arashi's eye narrowed and his voice gave away his concern. What anomalies are affecting Naruto? Hiruzen sighed and said, Naruto was born with an extremely powerful secondary chakra source. Details on this secondary chakra are scarce at the moment since we haven't been able to check the babe too closely. The energy is similar to the Kyuubi, but it is also distinctly different. The best I can describe the situation is that it's like Naruto was born with an infant Biju already sealed within him. What? Arashi couldn't believe what he was hearing. That makes no sense, sir. The Biju don't reproduce and that a good thing too or humanity would be wiped out. Hiruzen shook his head and said, that's the best way to describe Naruto's situation at the moment. I suspect that we'll eventually confirm that Naruto is a false Jinchuriki like the Gold and Silver brothers were. We just don't have much information to go on regarding the children of Jinchuriki. Female Jinchuriki even less so since the only known pregnant female Jinchuriki before Kushina died due to seal failure during childbirth. Arashi spoke, sir, we should return to the subject of our meeting. I request at least temporary custody of Naruto Uzumaki. If no one else stands up, I'm willing to take care of Karen Uzumaki as well until her parents' will is enacted. The Hokage thought about the request for a moment. Both Naruto and Karen were extremely important orphans for a variety of reasons. Their guardianship would be a potential nightmare. Any temporary care could easily end up becoming permanent. Hiruzen didn't know about Karen's parents. He did know that Jiraiya was to be Naruto's godfather and a potential guardian for Naruto. However, Jiraiya couldn't become Naruto's guardian because of his duties, and frankly Hiruzen didn't consider his loyal student to be fit to raise a baby. Hiruzen quickly recalled what he could remember about Arashi. The former Chunin had been on his way to becoming a solid jonin before the battlefield injury cost him his lower right arm, forcing him into administrative roles and then an honorable discharge. Hiruzen remembered that Arashi ran a supply shop mostly catering to shinobi needs. The young man's chief wares were Fuinjutsu related if he remembered correctly, since Arashi had picked up a bit of the art from Kushina and had been Minato's initial study buddy. Unless contradicted by Minato and Kushina's will, there really wasn't any real option to oppose Arashi taking care of Naruto with the adult Uzumaki dead. Jiraiya was the only real legal challenger as among teammates the sensei came before the comrade who came before the student. Hiruzen figured his student wouldn't challenge Arashi, which probably permanently placed Naruto with Arashi. Karen's placement then became the 100 million Ryo question for Hiruzen. Ichigo's entire team had been killed in the insurrection from what Hiruzen could find out. No standing legal claims there for guardianship if everyone in her parents' will was dead. Orihime had been a civilian doctor at the hospital. None of her surviving co-workers had the same legal claim. The laws regarding teammates only applied to current or former shinobi, although civilian co-workers were given similar preference where applicable in actual court cases. However, Naruto's placement was a massive argument against whoever wanted to take care of Karen, who wasn't Arashi. The saying "do not divide the clan against itself" was more than just sound advice. It existed in many legal protections within both Konoha's laws and the laws of the Land of Fire. Naruto was Kushina's only child which, without any internal clan rulings against it, made Naruto the new clan head and legally he was the Uzumaki clan. Hiruzen looked into Arashi's eyes and asked, are you aware that such guardianship could very easily become permanent? Are you ready to suddenly become the father of two very important children? Arashi nodded his head, I'm aware that such a possibility exists depending on what we find in the wills. Am I ready? Not in the slightest. However, Naruto and likely Karen need me to do this, so failure is not an option for me. Hiruzen accepted the answer with the grim determination it was given. Once one truly was a shinobi, they never could stop being one, and enduring unexpected challenges was a core part of being a shinobi. I will lead you to your new charges. At the same time in another realm, Chiron was leading the campers of Camp Half-Blood in a round of songs to cheer them up from a week of grueling midterms. The old trainer was happy that all of his charges had passed their midterms with at least passable grades. Part of ensuring that Half-Blood survived was making sure they had the education to function in the modern world as well. There were a number of older satyrs and some nymphs who were licensed teachers by the state of New York. As far as mortals were concerned, all of his year-round students were part of a private school that had a solid reputation academically. Heron's Academy of Classical Inquiry also had a good reputation with the local colleges if a graduate camper wanted to go that route and didn't mind being a year or two older than their college classmates. Camp Half-Blood had campers stay until they were 20 since monsters could smell the age of half-bloods. Most monsters took the attitude that half-bloods who had lived that long already probably knew how to defend themselves and it was safer for them to go after easier pickings. A half-blood who counted just on that would probably end up dead. Natural selection guaranteed that half-bloods who made it to that age were not that stupid. Except for Cabin 10, with those campers the odds of survival after camp were 50-50 much to Chiron's lament. A scream of terror from one of the younger campers surprised Chiron. He then turned to look at what had frightened the little boy and his eyes widened in shock. The oracle was walking towards the campers. More specifically, it was making its way to Mr. D. Everyone and every living thing in camp watched the oracle homed in on the shocked god. Their surprise turned to fear when Mr. D teleported to a different part of the arena and the oracle calmly changed direction to approach him. While he didn't show it, Mr. D was extremely worried that the oracle was approaching him with apparently a prophecy. Prophecies these days were mostly linked to quests, excepting the Great Prophecy, and he didn't do quests anymore. Not to mention the fact that he couldn't stand this particular oracle even when she was alive. Finally he growled, "What do you want?" An eerie green light filled the arena as blackish green smoke rose from the floor. The oracle spoke in a booming voice of authority. "The heirs of the divine fratricide struggle for their city. The shadow of the fourth fire as the moon falls secures the younger's line. The pool of blood as the third fire again casts shadows fortifies the elder's line. The moon's hope is given to the younger from east to west. The moon's venom is seized by the elder from past to present. Porphyrogenitus and Protitus struggle for their honor. The basilia is called while bound to the great tree. The mega's dew is called from the ash as the great tree burns. The sebastocrator is called as the fifth fire is kindled. The zos patricia is called from the ash as the first and second fires reignite. The heirs of the divine patricide struggle for their follies. The hope is lost in time. The sepulchres hold the line. Approach the goddess of the quadruple broken vows. She will open the path to the half-blood of the eldest gods. The heirs of the sage struggle for their paths. The elements are thrown into conflict with each other. Shadows and light are forged as one. An ancient quarrel is settled by broken vows. The past consumes the present in hatred. The heirs of the divine sunder struggle for their gods. 9 enslaved gods wagered between Porphyrogenitus and Protitus. The legacy of Theseus and Romulus allotted to Megas Dew and Sebastocrator. The fruit of Basilia and Zost Patricia are harvested together. That Helene and Frangos might be united as Romeos at last. But that said, the light and smoke vanished from the arena. The oracle then proceeded to walk back to the big house and put herself back on her tripod. Mr. D called out as the oracle walked away, "Hecate Max Mist now code Troy." Pamp Half-Blood was soon filled with suffocating smog of mist that put all the half-bloods, satyrs and imps to sleep. Chiron was the only other being in the camp besides Mr. D to remain awake. He turned to the god and said, "This is going to be a problem. How can two great prophecies be active at the same time? Why was this particular prophecy so long compared to other prophecies? Moreover, why was it sent here?" Mr. D frowned, wanting to know the same things as Chiron. The first and last lines of the prophecy suggested it should have gone to the Romans. Romulus was even mentioned by name. However, there were too many Greek references in the prophecy as well through the titles and word choices given. This meant that it was a prophecy that involved both the Romans and the Greeks given to him while he couldn't have any wine. How was he supposed to handle this sober? This was something the council needed to be made aware of immediately. Mr. D looked at Chiron and said, "Figure out a good cover for the brats. I'll inform everyone on the council about this prophecy." Chiron nodded his head as Mr. D vanished from camp. It was only through long experience and practice that Chiron was able to hold down the urge to curse the fates. Did his charges need another burden with the great prophecy already hanging over everyone's head like a sword of Damocles? The fact that this prophecy directly referenced the great prophecy was troubling enough, as was the mention of losing hope. What was concerning to Chiron was how connected the gods themselves were to this prophecy. Having a god or goddess involved in a prophecy always meant that something was going to go wrong. This prophecy threw in the big three, Artemis and another goddess by the time it was halfway done. Fuber was the only way Chiron could describe this. However, that line about enslaved gods was exceptionally troubling and solidified the problem in Chiron's mind. The thought of a god being enslaved was both blasphemous and ludicrous. Yet it was supposed to happen to 9 different gods. There was no polite way to put this. Chiron knew his divine siblings, nieces, nephews and cousins were going to collectively lose their shit over that news. That was a problem to face on another day. Right now, Chiron had to create a convincing cover to reinforce the mist overdose Hecate had given his charges. Now which prankster had pissed him off the most recently? Jiraiya and Arashi knelt in the catacombs at the Uzumaki shrine, having just placed Kushina and Minato's ashes in the prepared alcoves. The young couple was the last of the Uzumaki to be buried by the duo, much to their regret. Both Jiraiya and Arashi had wanted to bury their friends first. However, Uzumaki tradition dictated that the clan head be buried last if they died with any clansman. It was an outgrowth of the clan's attitude that a leader should be the first on the field and the last to leave it. The duo was already dancing on the edges of the Uzumaki's traditions by entering the catacombs themselves to bury the fallen clan members. This was something only allowed under clan law during the direst of circumstances. Neither man wanted to incur the wrath of the Uzumaki spirits by shredding their traditions. As the elder of the two, Jiraiya led the funeral rites by saying the traditional prayers. He also did the burning of the incense to ease the duo's spirits' worries and the food to sustain their spirits until they reached the court of Enma. Then there came the hell money to pay off their blood debt. Arashi had to give Jiraiya several pallets of hell money to cover the couple's debt. Minato might have been the more infamous of the duo, but both of the young couple had slaughtered several villages worth of people in the Third Shinobi War. Finally, Jiraiya offered the original final drafts of all his books to Minato so he could have something to read. The duo then left the catacombs and Jiraiya sealed the entrance as the Uzumaki traditions dictated. Hopefully, no one else would have to break the seal for many decades. Jiraiya suddenly froze after he finished the seal. He sensed a powerful chakra suddenly fill the temple. What chilled the sage's bones was the chakra he felt was a Biju's. Had Karen's seal somehow failed? Jiraiya bolted to the ladder and yelled at Arashi, "Hurry. The kids are in trouble." Arashi followed after Jiraiya like he was the hound of hell chasing the sage. The Sannin didn't bother unlocking the trapdoor and just broke through with a powerful leap. He landed on the temple floor in a battle stance. Arashi followed quickly behind Jiraiya, drawing his Tanto to help. The voice neither man ever expected to hear again called out. P-sensei and Arashi. Both men turned to their left and all the blood suddenly left their faces. Standing by the main temple altar was Minato and Kushina, dressed in the most bizarre white clothing that either man had ever seen. Jiraiya couldn't even begin to place where the duo wearing the guises of his dear friends got those clothes. The only thing either man could find somewhat relaxing about the situation is that Naruto and Karen were sleeping peacefully in their crib on their other side far away from the intruders. Rage inflamed Jiraiya as his blood returned and he growled out. "What are you and how dare you wear those forms in front of me?" No one insulted Minato or Kushina and got away with it in front of Jiraiya. Were these another village's Jinchuriki who had infiltrated the village and decided to mock the dead? The Kushina impersonator got a tick on her forehead and called out, "Pervy sage, use your brain for once. Just how dumb would an infiltrator be to look like us? You just got done our funeral rites so we decided to grace you with a visit. Next time you want to make me a food offering remember I prefer miso ramen over dango." Jiraiya was surprised to hear the impersonator mention the food offering he had made. It would have been almost impossible for a spy to find out since he had grabbed the best food in his fridge this morning and had kept the offering sealed in a scroll until he got to the catacombs. "How did you? How could you know?" Then the Minato impersonator spoke up, "Thank you for offering a copy of the Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja to me sensei. However, could you not offer me any more copies of your books that are itch or any future works in that genre? You know that I was never a fan of those types of books while I was alive and now they appeal to me even less." Arashi was starting to suspect that somehow the beings in front of him truly were what they appeared to be, even with how impossible that was. But how could he test that theory? A spy could have found out about the planned offerings, even with how remote the possibility was. He needed something old and private to test them. Arashi turned to Minato and asked, "What did I tell you at Shinji's Sake Shack when I found out that you and Kushina were dating?" Minato smiled at Arashi, seeing what the retired ninja was up to with the question. "We weren't at Shinji's Sake Shack when you learned Kushina and I were dating. We were at Kenshi's having hibachi when the fact that Kushina and I were dating came out. You pulled me to the side and told me that it didn't matter that I was a jonin and you were just a desk jockey chunin. If I was playing with Kushina's heart you would ensure that I would end up dead in a ditch if Kushina didn't get to me first." Arashi turned to Jiraiya and said, "They're the real deal. I don't know how or what happened to them. But, Minato and Kushina are in front of us." Kushina smiled at her old friend and said, "Minato and my spirits have simply returned to what they always should be. Decades ago a kami from this world peered into another world looking for the soul of one of his mortal kin. From what he told us, his method of searching accidentally collided with one of the kami of that world, shearing off bits of the kami's different aspects. Those parts were pulled into this world where they were incarnated as Minato and I. Now that our mortal avatars died we have rejoined the original kami we were accidentally taken from." Jiraiya then asked, "What about the Biju chakra you currently possess? What about being sealed in the Shinigami's stomach?" Minato turned a ting of green as he spoke up, "Please don't remind me about that. I could have gone the rest of eternity without knowing how my aunts and uncles felt being swallowed whole and then spat out." Kushina smirked and spoke mischievously. It was actually a little funny watching the Rakuto Sennin use a Heimlich maneuver on his brother to get him to cough you up. All the while the Shinigami was begging the Rakuto Sennin to not break out the Tanto. Minato shot his wife a glare and said, "I am so figuring out a way to fully share memories between our aspects so that you can experience what it felt like as well." That promise shut Kushina up completely. Minato turned to Jiraiya and said, "The Biju are actually kami that are rather hostile to humans. They were created by the Rakuto Sennin from a primordial kami that had turned into an enemy of humankind. The Biju chakra you sense is actually our divine chakra." Kushina then walked around the duo towards Naruto. She held her hand over his forehead and frowned. Kushina turned to Minato and said, "Naruto naturally has divine chakra like we suspected, making him a half-blood by our terms. However, something strange has happened. He has divine chakra from both you and me in equal portions. These portions are also equally balanced with his mortal chakra. That doesn't make any sense, Kushina. Are you saying that Naruto is 2/3 deity and 1/3 mortal? That he is both a Greek and a Roman half-blood? Shouldn't he be Greek since you bore him and he was connected to your chakra while developing? Minato couldn't believe what the avatar of his Greek half was telling him. Both of them had figured between their statuses as reincarnated deities and Kushina holding the Kyuubi that Naruto would be a half-blood. However, half-bloods were either Greek or Roman, and it made sense to Minato that Naruto would be Greek. Minato walked past the confused mortals and checked Naruto himself. Sure enough, his Greek half was telling the truth, as unbelievable as it seemed. How could this happen? A half-blood is either Greek or Roman. Kushina frowned, and then a thought came to her. We're the cause, Minato. All the previous crossover children were between a god or goddess of one aspect and a half-blood or legacy of a different aspect. In that case, the child always followed their divine parent. When legacies of different aspects had children in the past, the children always aligned with the aspect of the legacy closest to their divine ancestor. The only upsets to that rule was the rare case when a legacy of a much more powerful deity only a few generations further removed from their ancestor mixed with a legacy of a much weaker deity. The logic quickly became apparent to Minato. But that's not the case for us. Both of us are the divine parent, even if our avatars couldn't manifest any half-blood properties when they were mortal. Furthermore, we are the same deity even though I'm from the Roman half and you're part of the Greek half. Our divine essences must have reinforced each other, making Naruto more divine than mortal. I wouldn't be surprised if the fact that both of our mortal avatars were technically very distant legacies of the Rakuto Sennin also played a part. Kushina sighed and said, at least Naruto is safe here in this world. Father would kill him in an instant if he knew such a half-blood existed. She then thought about the new great prophecy that Dionysus had delivered to Olympus a few days ago. A glance at Minato brought part of the prophecy back to mind, and she muttered, a shadow of the fourth fire. Minato looked at Kushina and asked, what was that? It's part of the prophecy given to Dionysus a few days ago. I'm not sure how much of it, if any, has been passed along to our Roman aspects at this time. The thought just occurred to me that our son could possibly be involved in that prophecy, since you as the Yondaime Hokage would fit the description of one of the people mentioned in the prophecy. But the nod, Minato replied, if that's the case we will need to prepare Naruto and Konoha as best we can for the upcoming calamity. He turned to Arashi and said, look after Naruto and Karen well, my friend. Both Kushina and I will do what we can to help Naruto. However, divine law forbids kami of our pantheon from directly raising our half-blood children or even visiting them often. We also will need to check in everything with the Rakuto Sennin, since he is currently the head kami of this world and we are foreign kami. When Naruto gets older, let him know just how much both of us love and wish to be with him. He won't be able to see us, but we will watch him. Minato and Kushina then vanished from the temple, leaving the two men alone with the infants. Jiraiya turned to Arashi and said, I don't know how I'm ever going to explain this to Sensei. Chapter 2. Hiruzen looked out at the field before him, looking at the amazing and unheard of creatures before him. The Hokage turned to Jiraiya and said, I know last month that I said I would like proof of your claims about Minato and Kushina being avatars of a distant kami. However, this is not what I had in mind. Grazing in the field was a small band of unicorns and a small band of Pugasi that had appeared in the formerly empty field this morning. It had been a shock for the Genin team assigned to mow the field today when the Yondaime and his wife suddenly appeared in the field with a dozen foals. Minato had provided the unicorns and a manual for caring for them, while Kushina did the same for the Pugasi. The commanding Jonin had her team tend the foals with strict orders to her Genin to keep their mouths shut about the Yondaime and his wife's appearance. She then had made a beeline to the Hokage's tower and informed Hiruzen about the visitation. Jiraiya had just been lucky to be meeting with Hiruzen to give him an update how the minor lords of Fire Country were reacting to the attempted insurrection when the Jonin arrived. Neither ninja had ever expected to see something like this when they arrived at the field. The Sannin got to work while Hiruzen tried to wrap his mind around the fact that Jiraiya's sake and grief-induced illusions were real. Jiraiya took out a complex seal and laid it on the ground. The seal glowed for a few seconds, and then two sets of characters appeared in special sections of the seal array. Jiraiya turned to the Hokage and said, both faint Biju-like chakra traces in the field are exact matches for the faint chakra detected in the Uzumaki shrine last month. Minato and Kushina were here. Hiruzen had enough time to reset his mind, and he quickly set it to work. The Hokage turned to the Genins and ordered, did the Yondaime or his wife tell you what was special about these horses? One of the young Shinobi stepped forward and he said, sir, we were told that the unicorn's horns have extreme healing properties and that the horns regrow very rapidly. We were also told that the Pugasi, the winged horses, can fly once they get bigger. All the details we'd need to care about both breeds and how to use them are in the manuals that Hikari is currently holding onto. As he said this, he pointed at the young Kunoichi. The possibilities these foals opened up in the future were amazing to Hiruzen. He would have to read those manuals quickly to see if his thoughts were fully accurate. He resolved to visit the Uzumaki shrine once everything was properly handled and offer a sacrifice to the kami who Minato and Kushina had been avatars for in life. This could very well be Konoha's future ace in the hole against the samurai. On average, the average samurai in a straight combat situation was between a chunin and a special jonin in ability. There were far more S-rank shinobi compared to S-rank samurai, but that was the only situation in when the shinobi forces outmatched samurai forces. In most nations the samurai outnumbered the shinobi between 10 to 15 samurai per ninja. They also had a legal ironclad monopoly on good charka-enhanced warhorses. Those two facts gave the samurai armies a quantitative advantage to shinobi with a roughly similar mobility to shinobi, without being tired from using their own chakra like a shinobi would have to do. Hiruzen could already see the plan forming in his mind. Have these foals grow up and start breeding them while keeping their existence hidden. These foals were a gift to Konoha after all, which would be a very important fact to keep in mind once they revealed the new horse's existence. All he had to do was get a big enough band of both breeds so that the samurai couldn't justify the cost of paying another village to wipe the unicorns and Pegasi out. At that point the regular shinobi would have battle mounts of their own to potentially equal the samurai. That would break one of the pillars of the samurai's power. Jiraiya glanced over to his sensei and saw the gears turning in the old Hokage's mind. The Sannin could also follow a similar line of thought as his master. He spoke up and said, "Will this be classified as an A or an S rank secret, sir?" The genin quickly stood at attention when they heard Jiraiya speak. They turned as one to face the Hokage and waited for his answer. Hiruzen put his pipe in his mouth and said, "Both classifications, Jiraiya. The existence of the unicorns and Pegasi will be an A rank secret for the time being. However, the benefactor who provided these foals will be an S rank secret. Is that clear, genin?" All three genin nodded their heads and said, "We understand, sir." Hiruzen nodded his head and said, "I'm glad to hear that. I know that all three of you are mature enough to handle these secrets. The Yonde must also think so or I doubt he would have appeared to you with the foals." The young Kunoichi Hikari nervously spoke up. "Lord Hokage, what is the Yonde now? I've never heard of ancestral spirits doing something like this before." Now that was tricky question to answer because of the repercussions the answer would bring. Lying about Minato and Kushina being avatars of a kami might offend said kami. Annoying any kami was always a dumb idea. Annoying a kami that was actively helping you qualified as how are you still breathing levels of stupidity. However, revealing the truth would have destabilizing effect in and especially outside of Konoha. The clan heads in the village would be upset at the news, but they would eventually accept the truth. The samurai clans and the daimyo would never accept the truth and would be infuriated at the thought of a mere shinobi pretending to be connected to the kami. Finally Hiruzen said, "I cannot reveal that now, Hikari. It is currently a classified secret that I don't want to burden you with keeping. Just be grateful that even in death both the Yondaime and his wife are doing what they can to help Konoha. All of you must keep this a secret for now. But that doesn't stop you from using this as inspiration to improve yourselves." Hiruzen was happy to see that his genin accepted this order and advice without complaint. He then made a promise to himself to double-check on what Minato and Kushina's favorite foods were so he could make them an offering in thanks and for advice. Hopefully, the kami they were the avatars of would see fit to visit him so that he could work out a cover story that wouldn't offend the kami or endanger Konoha. The old swordsmith Totosai wondered why his old friend Hiruzen had invited him to visit Konoha shortly after the one-year anniversary of Danzo's failed coup and Hiruzen's reinstatement. Not that Totosai was going to deny Hiruzen a perfectly reasonable invitation when he really didn't have anything to do with his time. Hiruzen had even been kind enough to pay for his trip from his village near the capital. Besides, Hiruzen was technically Totosai's feudal lord since his place of residence during the last census was in Konoha's Han in the Land of Fire. About 2 days out from Konoha by carriage, Totosai gained an unexpected traveling companion. Klein was a semi-retired armorer who like Totosai was technically a vassal to the Hokage. Both of them had moved out of Konoha years ago because newer laws and the resulting changing markets made their trades less profitable in Konoha. Then when the carriage was half a day away from Konoha the old artisans picked up a third traveling companion. Ashitaka was a bow maker in one of the outlying hamlets sworn to Konoha. This led to a sword maker, an armor maker, and a bow maker entering a ninja village. Totosai would have expected this to be the start of a bad joke under normal circumstances. However, Totosai was left curious since he was personally involved and Hiruzen never did things without a reason. Why bring 3 masters of crafts that were effectively dead or dying for ninjas here? Soon the carriage reached the Hokage Tower, where the trio was promptly led into the tower by a full team of Anbu guards. Hiruzen was sitting in his full Hokage regalia with a stack of books on his desk and 3 chairs placed in front of his desk. The trio politely bowed to their lord and then spoke as one. "You summoned us, Hokage." How may we serve? Hiruzen looked at the best experts he could call on in their chosen fields and said. Thank you for coming so promptly when summoned. Please sit down. I have some things I need to talk about in your fields, and I need your experience to make a good decision. The trio had looks of surprise on their faces as they sat down. Hiruzen wished people would stop being so surprised when he asked for their advice or opinions. He got to where he was in life by knowing when he didn't know something and how to find someone to teach him what he needed to learn. The Hokage continued once the trio was seated. A member of a clan here in Konoha was recently gifted a set of arms and armor that according to the person giving them once belonged to a great general of an empire that ended over 500 years ago. According to what I have been told, this empire was at the western end of the largest continent of the world. I can only assume that the empire must have been on the other side of the celestial empire across the elemental sea. This set of arms and armor actually dates back to an earlier era of that empire, but they are still in good condition. I summon the three of you to examine these items and to get your opinion on just how useful they might be. Hiruzen then reached behind his desk out of view and pulled out a sword and gave it to Totosai. He handed a bow and quiver to Ashitaka. Finally, he handed a set of metal armor and a round board to Klein. Totosai unsheathed the sword which had a blade around the length of a katana and examined it. The blade was straight, which was rather odd to the swordsmith. Blades in the elemental countries had typically been curved since before the start of the shogunate era some 800 years ago. The blade itself was double-sided, while the handle was short for a blade of such length. A double-handed style would not work with this sword. It seemed primarily designed for thrusting while still being good at cutting. Totosai could see this sword being very effective on the battlefield in the right hands. Hiruzen watched quietly as his experts examined the arms and armor of Flavius Belisarius that Minato had gifted Naruto as a birthday present for his future use. Kushina had supplied a mountain of books relating to the use and manufacture of such weapons, along with providing historical and cultural information to place where the weapons came from. It was utterly fascinating to Hiruzen to learn about an entirely different world. Once the trio stopped examining the items, the Hokage spoke again. Men, I would like your opinions on the items you have been given for review. Totosai spoke first. This is a very good blade. It's not very well suited for most kenjutsu styles used today. However, that doesn't change the fact that it is a good blade. Totosai's eyes narrowed slightly as a realization hit him, and he spoke again. It also sidesteps most of the laws and taxes on bladed weapons. This is especially true for those laws on blades longer than the legal definition of a dagger. Except for Kumo, most shinobi villages had turned away from sword usage over the past couple of decades. That was because most of the daimyos had created a series of laws at the behest of their samurai that made owning and using an heirloom sword very expensive for non-samurai. Getting a new sword made if you weren't a samurai involved so many fees and registration forms that it generally wasn't worth it. The land of lighting was an exception because the Raikages had maintained a policy of straight-up killing any politician who tried to push forward such a law. Klein spoke next. This armor shares many similarities to the old Kusari Guzoku style armor that fell out of favor during the end of the shogunate. Iron supply shortages at the time and the use of seals to help reinforce lacquered leather scales led to the rise in popularity of the Dumeru style armor. As a form of armor, I cannot find any fault. Its only real weakness would be extremely thin piercing attacks like Senbon. It also cannot have any seals placed on it due to small area of the individual chain links in the armor. Both of these weaknesses are negated by the shield paired with it. It's a personal shield unlike the shield stands and shield carts the Ashigaru use in the samurai armies. I do find the holding spaces for darts to be a very interesting innovation. Seals could be incorporated into it like the Ashigarus to offer good protection against most regularly used ranged jutsus. Klein glanced at Totosai and started to piece the clues together. Its biggest issue is that it is designed to be used with styles probably unknown in the elemental countries. Ashitaka finally spoke after Klein was finished. This bow is amazing, sir. It's at least a third the size of our Yumi-style bows with similar draw weights. I know of many woodsmen who would love to have a bow like this when dealing with thick forests. However, from what I can see, it would also take a bit longer to make than a Yumi-style bow. It also uses materials that an experienced bowmaker would be unused to handling. It and its arrow's smaller size would also make it far easier to be sealed away when not in use. Hiruzen smiled at the news. This was just what he was hoping to hear. The arms and armor along with the supporting information sent by Minato and Kushina was both literally and figuratively a godsend for Hiruzen. He had been quietly trying to fight the degradation of his rank and file shinobi's combat abilities with little success for decades. The shadow wars that the daimyos played on each other through their hidden villages during the three shinobi wars had taken up too much of Hiruzen's time and energy. He hadn't been able to stop many laws from being passed by the samurai that gradually weakened the shinobi. Many of the laws were couched in such tones as to make opposing them seem treasonous. These laws also work their poison gradually by slightly increasing attacks over several years here or increasing the number of forms there. It was so subtle that most people couldn't see the pattern. Hiruzen could only see it now after living through the decades and paying attention to what happened. The elite stars of Konoha's forces had adapted well enough. However, the same could not be said for the Genin, Chunin, and even a few Takubetsu Jonin. Too many promising young shinobi had been cut down where they could have lived if only they had proper armor. Said armor was denied to them because it had become too expensive for most non-samurai or ashigaru to use leading armor to fall out of favor. Similar reasons lead to the abandonment of most weapons by Konoha shinobi, except for kunai and shuriken. The problems with this were many. Most shinobi just did not have the chakra reserves to use high-powered jutsus in any form of lengthy combat. This left them vulnerable if the first or second attack failed to kill the opponent. Kunai were meant as a multi-purpose tool for when chakra usage was not wanted with a secondary role as a backup knife. They weren't meant to be a ninja's primary close-quarters combat weapon like they had become, and they certainly were not meant to be used as projectiles. Hiruzen would never know how that old drinking game had actually entered mainstream combat usage. Another problem shinobi forces had developed was an issue of range. Few ninjutsu had a range of over 50 meters, and almost none could come close to 100 meters of effective distance. All of those ninjutsus required large chakra reserves and years of training and control in order to be used 1 or 2 times by most jonin. Any semi-competent samurai or solidly trained ashigaru could use a bow and fire 5 shots a minute and reliably hit the target 150 to 200 meters away with barely any chakra usage. Most good ones could fire faster and from an even further distance. Hiruzen knew that these hadn't been major problems for shinobi in his grandfather's day. Back then shinobi were primarily used for espionage, sabotage, and assassination. But now shinobi were primarily used as guards, rural police, and as rapid response military forces with their old focuses as a useful legacy feature. Training had somewhat adapted in the younger generations for their new roles. It was just that the equipment hadn't adapted. Minato and Kushina, bless their divine hearts, had given Hiruzen the tools he needed to reforge Konoha's forces. Comparatively easily stored or hidden bows would drastically increase the range of almost all his forces. Cheap swords and armor in the foreign style would bypass the economic hurdles against his shinobi, surviving in prolonged close-quarters combat. Most samurai would scoff at the idea of shinobi using foreign-based tools and would be unwilling to make rules against using such inferior weapons. Furthermore, it would be easy to get Konoha to adopt the new weapons and armor, along with several other complementary tools that Hiruzen was planning on bring back into style as they complemented the gifts Naruto had been given. News had been quietly circulating for months now in Konoha that the Yondaime and his wife had been given as servants by the Shinigami to the kami of a very distant land. From time to time this kami had seen fit to reward the couple for their faithful and exemplary service with gifts. These gifts were in turn given by the couple to Konoha since they wanted to look after their village. Hiruzen turned to his 3 experts with an almost predatory gleam in his eye. Well gentlemen, I am sure that the receiver of these gifts will be happy to know that he has been gifted very useful tools for his future career. Now it is time to discuss some other matters. Namely, what are your fees for moving all 3 of you and your apprentices along with your families to Konoha proper? Once we decide that the 4 of us can head out and you can each pick where your new workshops will be. Location will not be an issue, I assure you. Arashi Kazama was sitting in stands of the Ninja Academy with pride as the exhibition started. 10-year-old Naruto was one of the contestants in the mounted exhibition matches. He was dressed in the standard academy uniform which consisted of a steel helmet with a built-in blank forehead, protector of the Namikaze style. Naruto wore the now standard long-sleeve green academy shirt with a Namikaze-style cuirass covering his torso and his arms to his elbows. There was a band on Naruto's left hand that had his shield sealed away while a band on Naruto's right had his bow sealed away. Naruto was wearing a belt that held his practice sword in its sheath with a series of seals opposite the sheath contained various missile weapons and supplies. All of Naruto's legs were covered in tough long-legged brown pants that ended tucked away in closed steel-toed boots. The only visible mark of individuality in the uniform was the clan seal on the belt buckle. This restructuring of the academy was part of a series of reforms Hiruzen had forced through despite many prominent clan leaders initially objecting to it and other reforms. However, the Hokage didn't fool around with the clan leaders' egos. He pulled out the cold hard facts that shinobi deaths had been increasing since the Second Shinobi War and that this trend was reversed among those who had adopted the Namikaze armory compared to their peers. It was hard for many to argue against changes designed to save their kids' lives in a very dangerous career. Especially when Hiruzen hit their egos by telling them that samurai dealt in pride while shinobi dealt in practicalities. With a loud voice the officiating Chunin called out, "Summon shields." As one, the 10 contestants wiped the seals on the band of their left arm, summoning their shields. 10 shields with Konoha's symbol on a green background appeared in the kids' hands. Once they were genin they could have shields with their clan symbols displayed. The Chunin then said, "Do all contestants have 6 shuriken loaded on their shields?" After seeing a round of nods the Chunin continued. Contestants will proceed one at a time to gallop on their donkeys and shot their shuriken at the provided targets. Targets are set at 30 meters away from the track line. Points will be allotted for hitting targets and for the location of the hits based off of potential lethality. Points will be deducted from the contestant's score if they slow the pace of their steed. After saying this, the Chunin summoned the first contestant and had her run the line. Arashi watched as the girl took the bow shuriken-style shuriken from her shield and threw it at the target. The dart-like style of shuriken was seeing resurgence in Konoha, displacing the Hira shuriken style Arashi had used in the past. The girl did very well on her first throw. However, she had a bit of trouble getting a new shuriken as the donkey galloped. This pattern repeated throughout her run, resulting in the girl not hitting 3 targets due to having gone past them. No one in the audience mocked the girl for not hitting so many targets. Mounted combat was still so new that many shinobi took classes in how to fight on a steed. Officially, this was introduced to help shinobi defend wagons. Arashi knew that truthfully this was so that those with potential could be found for the developing Pegasi and Unicorn Corps. Once the girl had finished her run she left the field and the next contestant made his run. This kid did even worse in Arashi's eye, having thrown all his shuriken in a rush and missing several targets by a very wide margin. An old lesson from his old Jonin sensei Tsukumo Hada came to mind. Never throw a weapon in combat if you're not confident about the shot. One throw must lead to one kill. Another shot can be found later, but a lost shuriken could be your death. Most of the other kids did better on hitting their targets or not throwing on a bad shot. Finally, the moment Arashi was waiting for came when Naruto led his mount to the starting line. Naruto encouraged his donkey to go as fast as it could when the Chunin gave the signal. His hands quickly and firmly grabbed his shuriken while his eyes remained focused on the target. Naruto let the shuriken fly at the optimal time and each struck true. Parental pride filled Arashi's heart as he examined the targets Naruto hit with his binoculars. Each shuriken was embedded in its target by 4 or 5 centimeters. Moreover, Naruto's shuriken had struck either an eye socket or the throat. Any real person struck would have been killed with such throws, even if Naruto's shuriken weren't covered in poison. The Chunin running the event called out. The winner of the mounted shuriken throwing contest is Naruto Uzumaki. Arashi enthusiastically joined the crowd in cheering on the announcement of Naruto's victory. Naruto turned on his mount and grinned at the crowd before returning to his fellow contestants. The Chunin called out. "Seal away your shields and return to the waiting area." Naruto led the other contestants back to the waiting area since he was the winner of the match. Karen was the first to greet him when he reached the donkey's post. Naruto was given just enough time to tie the donkey to the post and dismount before Karen tackled him in a hug. "Congratulations on winning, Naruto." "Thanks, Karen." Naruto eagerly returned his sister's hug and said, "However, I can't take too much pride in my win. After all, my biggest competition was benched back here." Karen resisted the urge to roll her eyes at her brother in all but blood as she replied, "Oh, don't sell yourself short, Naruto. We both know that you're much better at the mounted competitions than I am. Besides, clans are only allowed to have 1 clan member in each competition per grade. So it only makes sense that we leave the mounted competitions to you. Would you rather take my place in the calligraphy contest coming up?" A nervous look appeared on Naruto's face at the thought of trying to copy a series of old court poems in kanji. It was only thanks to lots of time and effort that he could competently read and write in kana, thanks to his ADHD and dyslexia. Kanji, especially the more fanciful traditional kanji, was just barely in Naruto's power to read slowly. As for writing it, the less said about that disaster the better. It was an open secret in the family and at the academy that Karen was going to be the only member of the Uzumaki to be a traditional seal mistress for the current generation. Karen and Arashi were trying to help Naruto develop a form of sealing using either Latin or Greek. However, that kind of experimentation was slow-going due to the nature of seal experiments and the fact that they didn't take to those languages like Naruto did. Naruto conceded the point to Karen saying, "I thought our goal was to honor our clan in this exposition. When did we change the goal to mocking them?" This earned Naruto a quick punch to the shoulder as Karen led him to the waiting area. Hiba and Choji soon joined the Uzumakis with Choji speaking first. "Good match, Naruto. We saw everything on the exposition Jinjutsu one of the instructors is creating over there." As Choji said that he pointed to the wall to the group's left where everything the instructor was seeing was displayed on a mirror. Hiba snorted and said, "You're just lucky I wasn't able to compete or I would have blown you away. Still, you did alright, Naruto." Karen fought down the urge to smack Hiba and said, "Alright. You think Naruto did alright? Is Akamaru going to be doubling as your seeing-eye dog in the future because Naruto did fantastic? Besides, how can you claim that you would have won when you were ejected from the writing classes? Hey. Kiba called out, that wasn't my fault. I was doing great in the writing classes before they kicked me out. It's totally unfair what they did to me. Toji opened another bag of chips and cut in. Kiba, you were lucky you were only kicked out of the writing classes, remember? I seem to recall the Sandaime berating you for accidentally gelding that Pegasus they brought in to show us why we'd want to learn how to ride well. Kiba huffed as he tried to forget about the incident as he referred to it. He had been showing a new kunai trick he had learned from a cousin while the boys were waiting for the girls to finish looking at the Pegasus. The kunai ring had slipped from the tip of his pinky finger as he was twirling it about. The kunai had gone sailing in the air and some of the classmates had screamed, startling the animal, causing it to take flight. Unfortunately, the Pegasus flew right in line with the kunai and lost what would have been his two best buds. Fortunately for Konoha's Pegasi Corps, the Pegasus in question was a second-generation homebred foal with many brothers and cousins to continue the herd. That was a good thing for Kiba as well, or he would have been ejected from the academy and imprisoned for life over destroying a vital village resource. Kiba's mom still hadn't been happy having to pay the village the price of a traditional warhorse as part of the fines for his blunder. The Pegasus in question had been quietly gifted to the Uzumaki clan, along with half the fines leveled on Kiba by the Hokage. Hiruzen did not want to risk offending the kami that became Minato and Kushina. The money was used to build a new altar at the Uzumaki shrine, dedicated to the unknown kami. The gelded Pegasus was named Narses by Naruto after the famous eunuch general in his mother's history books about the land the kami intertwined with his parents came from. For the next 20 minutes or so the group chatted amongst themselves while watching the other matches. Naruto then said, well, our year's mounted archer contest is coming up shortly. I should get ready for it. Eren smiled at him and said, knock them dead, Naruto. Choji and Kiba also wished Naruto well as he headed to the donkey posts. Naruto got on the now rested donkey and followed his classmates to the arena. He waited for the Chunin to tell them to unseal their bows and eagerly did so. Once Naruto had his bow in his hand, he was in the zone. Things seemed so much clearer to him when he had a bow in his hand. Naruto's vision had always been surprisingly good, even if somewhat inconsistent. For example, he had amazing vision outside on most nights, and at the same time his dark vision was baseline when he was indoors away from windows. This paled to what Naruto felt when he had a bow, since it seemed like he instinctively knew what to ignore and what to focus on. His already stellar aim also seemed to skyrocket when he used a bow. Naruto patiently waited for the Chunin to call his name, and then he bolted. Arrows were grabbed from his quiver, notched, drawn, and released with lightning fast speed. Each arrow flew straight and true at Naruto's intended targets, which were the furthest ones on the field. As Naruto had done before with the shuriken, each of his targets would have died if they were a real person. Naruto reached the end line of his run in what seemed like seconds to him, having completely astonished the crowd. Twice as many arrows had been fired by Naruto than any of his competition, and they were all instant kill shots. A loud gasp of shock and surprise filled the crowd, breaking Naruto from the zone. He saw some onlookers pointing at him. Or rather, they were pointing above him. Naruto then noticed that a light was shining over him. He looked up and saw two glowing signs floating over his head. Chapter 3. Everyone in the crowd wondered at the two glowing symbols above Naruto's head. The power behind those symbols was obvious to anyone who had even somewhat basic chakra control. Floating the right of Naruto's head was a pair of silver antlers, while floating to his left was what looked like three different phases of the moon merged together. For the next 12 seconds the symbols floated in the air before they suddenly vanished. Voices started to fill the exposition grounds as people asked each other what this meant. Hiruzen cut that off by using a jutsu to enhance the volume of his voice, calling out. Silence everyone. I know we just had an unusual occurrence. Once the officiating Chunin has finished up this round, I will explain what we just witnessed. Mizuki, if you would please announce the winner of this grade's mounted archery test. The previously named Chunin nodded his head and quickly collected his wits. Mizuki called out, the winner of the mounted archery contest is Naruto Uzumaki. Contestants, seal your bows away. Mizuki turned his attention to the Hokage just like everyone else in the stand had. Hiruzen took out his pipe, filled it, lit it, and put it to his mouth. He took a puff of smoke to finish thinking about what he would say before he spoke. Hiruzen then let out a cloud of smoke before he started to explain what everyone had seen. All of you are aware that our beloved Yondaime and his wife have been entered into the service of an unknown kami from very distant lands. We only have the Namikaze armory, which has already saved several hundred shinobi lives, thanks to the couple's love for our village. Now, what is not popularly known is that the Yondaime and his wife have also sent some books on the land of the kami they now serve to their living kin. The books are mainly about the customs of the land and its history hundreds and thousands of years ago. I have been honored with the privilege of reading those books, so I know what just happened. Those symbols were sent by the kami that the yondaime and his wife serve. It is a sign that the kami now considers itself to be Naruto Uzumaki's patron. The kami is showing its favor towards Naruto and stating that it expects great things from Naruto in the future like his parents did in the past. There are some more details for Naruto to be aware of now that a kami has declared itself his patron, given the lands this kami comes from. These are a private matter which I must discuss with Naruto immediately. I apologize to all contestants at this exposition that I will not be able to see your future contests. It has been a joy to see your efforts displayed here today, and it brings joy to my heart that Konoha has so many promising shinobi in its future. However, the kami in question has been extremely generous to all of us, even though we do not pay it homage and we are so distant from its lands. It would be a great shame on all of us if we were to insult this kami by not honoring its traditional customs when asked of us. Tie up your donkey, Naruto, and I will meet you there. Naruto did as instructed and quickly led his donkey to a waiting post. Hiruzen was at his side by the time he finished tying up the donkey. Naruto looked up at the old leader and asked, "What next, Gramps?" Hiruzen chuckled and said, "We will be making a quick detour to the market and then to the Uzumaki shrine." The duo headed to the market and the cage Bunshin Hiruzen created earlier dispersed by the time they reached the market. Arashi had been informed that Hiruzen would handle telling Naruto everything and that he could stay to support Karen in her competitions. Hiruzen found a livestock seller and bought a chicken from the man. Then the duo headed for the Uzumaki shrine with the chicken under a stasis seal. Once at the shrine, Hiruzen spoke to Naruto. "Get some kindling and place it on the altar to the kami your parents serve while I double check a few things." Hiruzen grabbed the book on Greco-Roman mythology and looked up the symbols that had been seen above Naruto. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the kami those symbols represented. With a quiet mutter, Hiruzen said, "I wasn't expect that one." Personally, Hiruzen had been expected the kami in question to be Hikater Enyo. The occasional conversations he had with the avatars over the years suggested that the kami was more comfortable appearing as Kushina. Hiruzen took this to mean that the kami was normally female. Those particular kami were the primary candidates in the Hokage's mind as their domains fit Minato and Kushina very well. Jutsu seemed to be equivalent to magic while both of them excelled at combat. Arashi favored Hephaestus or Athena in the private bet as the couple's originating kami. His reasoning being how Kushina and Minato were craftsmen coming up with jutsus and the connection to strategic war. Jiraiya was rooting for the couple's kami to be one of the big kami like Zeus or Poseidon. Naruto finished putting the kindling on the altar and walked up to Hiruzen. "That is done, Gramps. What do we do next?" Hiruzen replied. "First, Naruto, I need to explain some things to you. The story about your parents being in the service of a foreign kami is false. They are actually the avatars of the kami. What happened at the Academy Exposition was that kami officially claiming you as their child under the divine laws of their realm. Apparently this group of kami known as the Olympians likes to reserve this ritual for when their half-blood children have achieved something of note. According to your father, this is so that their half-blood children know that their divine parents are in fact watching them." Naruto's entire world was flipped upside down and shaken for all it was worth. His parents were kami. They were parts of the same kami. How did that even work? What did that make him? However, he latched on to one particular thing Hiruzen said, according to Dad. "Gramps, did my father tell you this before he died or would that be disappeared?" This was the part that none of the trio had been looking forward to for years. Hiruzen sighed and said, "He did not, Naruto. Your parents were not even aware that they were avatars of a kami until after their deaths. It might be best to think of them like divine cage bunshins for the kami. When they died as Minato and Kushina, they rejoined the kami. Since then, the kami has occasionally recreated those avatars to briefly visit Konoha. Mom and Dad have been to Konoha since I was born." Naruto's voice gained a fragile quality. Emotionally, he was near his breaking point. "Why didn't they ever visit me? Do they not love me?" Hiruzen placed his hand firmly on Naruto's shoulders as he kneeled down to look the boy in the eye. "Your parents love you greatly, Naruto. Never doubt that for a second. Why do you think that so many gifts have appeared since your birth, like your future armor or the Pegsai and unicorns? What about all these books collected here about a separate world and a different civilization? Your parents oversee lands farther away than we previously imagined were possible. These things were given to you because your parents love you and want you to have your full inheritance. They may be avatars of an Olympian, but they cannot do as they please. Those kami, like our native ones, are bound by a set of rules to maintain order in the land. One of the rules the Olympians have is that they cannot raise their half-blood children, which you are as the child of a kami's avatar. Things would have been different had your parents' mortal selves not been slain, but that is not the world we live in. Both of your parents have repeatedly written you letters that they have delivered to Arashi to keep until you were able to be claimed. Arashi has told me that their first question when either of your parents visits him is how you are doing. If they could visit you they would Naruto. However, your parents have to be very careful because you are a special case among the Olympians as half-bloods. You know from your studies that in the Western culture the Olympians have two different names and apparently forms. The original they got from the Greeks and a second one they got from the Romans. The children of both forms have apparently fought each other many times, causing much turmoil for the Olympians. According to your parents, the Olympians' only solution to the problem was to cast a powerful jutsu over both groups, making them forget that the other existed and taking strict measures to ensure that both sides did not encounter each other again. The problem, Naruto, is that you break those measures. Minato was the avatar of the kami's Roman form, while Kushina was the avatar of the kami's Greek form. You are both a Greek and a Roman half-blood, making you a danger to the Olympians' plan on keeping the two groups separated. Kushina has even mentioned the possibility of some Olympians trying to kill you like Iwa would try if the cost wasn't too high. Your parents are being strict with following all the rules regarding Olympians interacting with half-bloods so that none of their fellow kami can use those rules against you. Naruto closed his eyes and contemplated what Hiruzen had told him for a minute. His parents did love him despite what he feared for a moment. They had left him letters with Uncle Arashi and they were looking out over him. How could they know when he won the archery competition unless they were keeping an eye on him? If they had to stay away for his protection he would accept that fact. The young half-blood firmed up his resolve and spoke. I have two questions, Gramps. Is the chicken supposed to be a sacrifice to my parents? Also, what kami are my parents avatars of? Hiruzen nodded his head and replied, that is correct, Naruto. The kami revealing her identity seems to be a worthy moment for you to offer thanksgiving. As to the kami in question, your mother is the avatar of Artemis, while your father is the avatar of her Roman persona Diana. Artemis looked at the trio of half-bloods that had stumbled across her hunt's camp with mild interest. It had been a while since some half-bloods genuinely stumbled upon camp. Although, most of her attention was on making sure that everyone on Olympus was so drunk so that they didn't notice her or Diana claiming Naruto. The odds could tell when a claiming happened, but they could only tell who the parent doing the claiming was if they were on Olympus during the claiming. Having a Greek and a Roman god claim a child at the same time was very rare, but it had happened several times before. There were just so many different gods, and both camps held weekly events that were often used by the gods as a basis for claiming. Both Artemis and Diana had wanted to claim Naruto for years now. Their lives as Kushina and Minato were completely unexpected, but neither personality of the goddess would give any of it up. Living as mortals in a different realm had been more eye-opening and wonderful than anything they had ever expected. It had been the most massive change in Artemis's life since the start of the Romans from the Greek-Trojan schism. However, her claiming a child would not have been smooth for divine politics even under the best of times. These were certainly not the best of times given the two great prophecies in play. Once the fact that she and Diana were Naruto's parents came out, then not even Fuber could accurately describe the incoming mess. There was also the fact that a god had to claim their child if they did something that undeniably linked them to a particular god, and there were multiple witnesses of the act who were aware of the supernatural. Hera got that law passed millennia ago when Zeus tried to hide some of his children from her. So Artemis and Diana used their newly acquired abilities to work together along with their shinobi skills to head this problem off. They drugged everyone on Olympus so that they were so out of it that Diana was literally able to castrate Priapus with a rusty spoon, and no one noticed. By timing this with the Konoha Ninja Academy's exhibition, they were able to safely claim Naruto without anyone knowing it. This required most of Artemis and Diana's attention, so they weren't able to secure the hunter's camp as well as they typically did. The odds of someone stumbling across the hunter's camp during this brief window were so small Artemis was sure the fates had a hand in it. Now she had to deal with a young teenage son of Hermes, a very young daughter of Athena, and her newest half-blood half-sibling, who was the current headache of Olympus. Artemis peered into the trio's minds while Zoe talked to them. Her time as a shinobi gave Artemis a better understanding of mortal reactions, allowing her to predict how a mortal or half-blood will react instead of just depending on reading their minds. Said understanding was far more enhanced than Kushina or Minato could hope to have, given her access to far more information about people than mortals could have. Artemis could see that the conversation was heading in a direction that would just cause problems. She held her hand up to cut off Zoe and spoke. I know that things seem unfair to you three, and that you three have faced challenges that by the mortal standards of this time should not be faced by people so young. I will say that all of you have been provided the tools needed to have a solid chance to survive and thrive in this world. Sadly, history has shown that the results of gods or goddesses excessively interacting with their children have terrible results for everyone involved. Our current system is not a particularly good one. It simply is the least terrible option available to everyone. Now let us focus on more important matters at hand. First off, Luke Castellan, a male entering the hunter's camp without my permission is a serious offense, even if it is done unknowingly and accidentally. I officially absolve you of this sin given your efforts in the protection of Thalia and Annabeth. The protection of maidens is under my domain, so by protecting your friends, you have been helping me and have my thanks." Artemis adjusted her gaze to look at the female duo of the demigod trio. "Thalia Grace and Annabeth Chase, the two of you currently are under my domain and thus my protection. However, my aid will have to be of a limited nature. The same pacts that prevent the gods from using their full power to harass half-bloods they don't like also limits gods from giving their full aid to those half-bloods they wish to help. Do you understand this?" Annabeth just nodded her head while Thalia frowned as she thought about what Artemis had told them. Thalia didn't have a high opinion of the hunters and found their attitude towards Luke to be offensive. She wasn't too thrilled about Artemis and her somewhat standoffish approach. However, Thalia was happy that Artemis was at least giving an explanation and recognized that things weren't that great. Thalia frowned and said, "I don't like it." Zoe was surprised when Artemis smirked and replied, "That would make two of us. But my question was if you understand what I told you, Thalia. You should always remember to answer the question asked of you by a god, because there are many gods and goddesses who will punish you for disrespecting the gods as they defend their actions. All three of you should keep this in mind in the future, because an honest answer protects a mortal under council rulings in recent centuries. I would prefer it if none of you entered my uncle's dominion for many years to come. Now again, Thalia, do you understand what I've told you?" For a second, Thalia wondered if this is what having a big sister was like. Technically Artemis was her older sister, even if you weren't supposed to point that out to gods. Thalia nodded her head and said, "I understand." Artemis nodded her head accepting Thalia's response. She then turned to several of her attendants and said, "Selen, I want you to retrieve an atlas of New York State and include Camp Half-Blood's location on it. Phoebe, get some appropriate non-hunter clothes for the girls that are good for traveling and $80. Finally, Naomi, I want you to fetch 3 water canteens, 1 small nectar canteen, and enough dried food to feed this trio for 3 days." The goddess returned her attention to the demigods as the hunters left to complete their tasks. "The money should get you an appropriate set of traveling clothes, Luke. We naturally do not have such clothes for men on hand. Camp Half-Blood was established by the gods as a sanctuary and training ground for heroes like you. Once there no god or goddess that wishes you harm can touch you as long as you are within the camp. I would like to offer you 3 more aid, but this is the most I am allowed to give." Soon the hunters returned with the requested items which were promptly handed to the half-bloods. The trio then departed to make their way to Camp Half-Blood. Artemis waited a moment after the trio left before turned to Zoe. "You were surprised by my actions, Zoe?" Zoe nervously looked at the door of the tent before turning to look at her goddess. "I don't understand, Milady. Why were you so friendly with that boy? Why didn't you offer those girls the protection of the hunt?" This wasn't the first time over the past century that Artemis did something that surprised Zoe. Those times had been increasing over the past several decades and had increased dramatically over the previous decade. Artemis arched an eyebrow and replied, "Since when did politeness become equivalent to being friendly, Zoe? The boy likely will become troublesome for those girls in the future like you claimed because of his outlook. However, that is in the future. His actions at present have been respectable and for that I have given him what aid I can. As for girls, neither of them would be good for the hunt at the present time. Annabeth is so young that making her a hunter would detrimental to her health. In 3 years we might have the opportunity to have her join us. Thalia does not have the right mentality to join us at this time. Besides, she is potentially involved in the Great Prophecy and having her join might be seen by the fates as an attempt to sidestep the prophecy. Such attempts never end well for anyone in the attempt. There was a sudden rush of energy within the goddess and her nose picked up the delightful scent of a sacrificial offering. Artemis smiled as the offering and accompanying prayers washed away her nerves over the current situation. Naruto understood the situation and still loved her as his mother. Everything was right in the world. Arashi watched as Karen brushed Narsa's coat while Naruto preened Narsa's wings. Since the Pegasus belonged to the Uzumaki, it was only right in Arashi's mind that duo take care of the animal. Besides, it would give them both the skills needed to work in any stable in the future. That would be a useful cover role in the future and it was one that was less suspected by anyone worried about a ninja attack. Karen moved her step stool again so that she could brush another section of Narsa's coat. She turned to look at Naruto and said, "Do you think Narcissus will stop growing so fast if we cut down on the oats we feed him every day?" "No, don't be so mean, Karen. Narcissus is just having a growth spurt. We'll get ours soon enough and then we won't need the stools to groom and preen him. Besides, Pegasi reached their full height in just the first couple years of life. If Narcissus stayed a convenient height for us right now then we wouldn't be able to ride him in the future. That would have been a real bummer." All the other Pegasi were under strict shinobi control and were limited to still developing Pegasi Corps. Practically every shinobi wanted to join the Pegasi Corps. Only about 2% of all applicants were accepted. The Unicorn Corps got the cream of those who couldn't make it into the Pegasi Corps. Well over 90% of all applicants were left with a note to try again later. Perrin really didn't see the bottleneck in applicants to acceptance rate into the Pegasi Corps changing anytime soon. She didn't see any attempts for her to join the Pegasi Corps in the future succeeding, given her average score at donkey riding. This made Narcissus her only option if she ever wanted to enjoy a quick Pegasus ride in the future. Not that Narcissus was a bad Pegasus. Karen found him much easier to care for than any of the donkeys at the academy. However, Narcissus had made it clear that he was Naruto's Pegasus, even if he would let her ride him. The duo turned to Arashi once their chores were done and said, "All done, Uncle Arashi. Who gets to ride Narcissus first?" Arashi chuckled and said, "You two know the drill." He fished a Ryo coin out of his pocket and got it ready. "Karen, since you rode second last time you get to call the toss this time. So do you want heads or tails?" Karen called out, "Heads, Uncle Arashi." Both Uzumakas had their eyes glued to the Ryo as it spun in the air and landed on the stable floor. Karen excitedly jumped into the air with her fist raised high. She cheerfully yelled out, "Called it. Heads, I get to ride first." Naruto pouted for a split second before he headed over to grab the saddle. He helped ready Narcissus for riding and then helped Karen onto Narcissus' back. Arashi opened the stable door so that Karen could calmly ride Narcissus out of the barn. Both Arashi and Naruto followed after Karen as she and Narcissus cleared the barn. Arashi called out, "Remember the routine, Karen. Have Narcissus trot the course once on his feet before you start to fly. You also need to keep the height limit in mind at all times." Arashi refused to let Naruto or Karen fly Narcissus higher than several meters. The limit was set so that if either one fell they would be seriously hurt, but they'd live from the fall. Narcissus was also still very young for a Pegasus, and Arashi didn't want to risk him falling to the ground from exhaustion. "I remember, Uncle Arashi. Besides, Narcissus won't let me down. Isn't that right, boy?" Karen said as she led the Pegasus to the start of the beginner rider course. Arashi was keeping his eye firmly on Karen, ready to rush to her if the need arose. Neither of his children was going to get hurt as long as he could prevent it. While Karen started the course, Naruto unsealed a binder and opened it. The binder contained copies of all the letters his parents had written to him, starting with the ones written before he was born as most shinobi parents did. Ever since the claiming last week the binder had grown with all the letters Uncle Arashi had been saving for him. Some letters were short notes about how his parents loved him and wished they could raise him. Other letters contained tidbits of his parents' lives and recounting of divine shenanigans. Yet still others were lectures about some incident in Naruto's past where his mother or father would lay out what he did wrong and how he could have done better. Many of those types of letters were accompanied by a letter from the other parent double-teaming him. Naruto wouldn't trade even a single letter for all the gold in the Land of Fire. Here was concrete proof in clear Greek and Latin writing that his parents loved him and constantly watched over him. Naruto was even happy at the scolding letters since it proved his parents wanted the best out of him. Moreover, a new pair of letters had appeared on his nightstand when he woke up and Naruto was eager to read them. Op's letter was first by pure happenstance. She mentioned to Naruto how she and Artemis had planned things out so that they could safely claim him as they knew he would do well at the exhibition. Diana also mentioned how she used Priapus to make sure everyone on Olympus was completely out for the count. Seriously, the deserved it in Naruto's mind for what he tried to do to his great aunt. There was the fact that his parents completed a task that had to be an S-rank mission in difficulty all because they trusted in his abilities and wanted to show the world that he was their son. If that wasn't an example of parental love by word and deed, then what was an example? Pops also went on in her letter that she and Artemis had found an overlooked loophole in divine laws regarding divine half-blood communications. Olympus had rules on meeting in person, meeting through images, sending divine messengers, talking in dreams, and even sending portents. However, there were no rules on pen and paper writing, so both Diana and Artemis could send as many letters to Naruto as they wished. Naruto could expect an increase in his letter volume now that Naruto knew about them and he was publicly claimed. Diana did not include the reason why this oversight occurred in Olympian law because of how embarrassing it was. Most gods and goddesses on Olympus were illiterate. Gods had perfect recall, were immortal, and could go where they want as long as it wasn't another god's domain. They had no need to write things due to preserve facts or to talk to others. Then there was the fact that the alphabet was imported into Greece by a demigod who had visited another civilization centuries after Olympus was founded. Who wanted to learn menial foreign skill found by a demigod? If it was truly something important, then the gods of Olympus would have invented it themselves. Artemis learned how to read and write back in ancient Greece to put those uppity mortals who completely dehumanized women in their place. She also kept a complete collection of works written by ancient Greek women that modern historians would eagerly kill to read. The only other two deities that could read and write for sure as far as Artemis knew were Aphrodite and Ares. Athena wasn't on the short list of literate deities due to her pride in her memory and wisdom. Aphrodite learned to read due to her becoming enamored with the idea of love letters. Ares learned because Mars picked it up due to Roman battle commanders writing plans down, and Ares couldn't stand the thought of his Roman half having a skill that he didn't. Somewhat ironically, Poseidon might actually know how to read and write. Artemis knew he knew how to read sea charts. She also knew that letter writing had been a big part of sailor culture among sailors who could read for centuries. Poseidon and Neptune were also known for indulging in all aspects of their domains. She just never felt the need to ask him that question. Naruto would not have cared even if he knew the full truth about the writing loophole. All that mattered to him was that he had a direct connection to his parents. He finished Diana's letter just as Karen finished her course. Karen came to a stop next to Arashi and got off of Narses. Naruto used this time to close his binder and seal it away. Karen grinned at Naruto as she spoke. "Okay Naruto. It's your turn on the course." With a small smile Naruto replied, "Thank you Karen." Naruto quickly climbed onto Narses. An unknown and yet somehow familiar feminine voice suddenly boomed in Naruto's head. 6 o'clock Naruto, rise as fast as you can. Naruto didn't stop to think. He just reacted as something in his very being knew that he had to listen to this voice. Arashi and Karen were both shocked as Naruto jerked on the reins urging Narses to ascend. Arashi couldn't believe Naruto's actions for a second. The boy loved to have fun, but he also knew when he needed to behave. Naruto also knew why everyone insisted on being so careful with the rules regarding someone riding a Pegasus. Why had he just shattered every rule regarding Narses? Karen followed Naruto with her eyes and then pointed in shock at where he was flying. "Look Uncle Arashi. Something's forming in the sky." Arashi followed Karen's hand and saw a vortex of golden energy forming in the sky. Someone then tumbled out of the vortex and screamed at the top of their lungs. From the pitch of the voice and a rough guess at the person's size, Arashi estimated the interloper was a 10 to 12-year-old girl. Arashi's heart leaped to his throat with fear as the girl fell. The height was too great, she'd die if she hit the ground. Her only hope was divine intervention. Arashi suddenly realized that Naruto was on an intercept course for the girl. Said intervention might already be happening. Thalia Grace was having what might be the worst day in her entire 11-year-old life. Losing her little brother had somehow gotten bumped down the list from number 1. This was not an achievement she ever wanted to have. Things had been going decently since the trio's run-in with Artemis and her hunters last week. The supplies Artemis had gifted them with had really helped them out. Thalia also suspected that her divine big sister had been helping them out on the sly where she could. That book on trap-making Luke had spotted and bought at the Goodwill shop might have been coincidence. However, their traps always catching enough small animals for 3 kids to have 3 solid meals plus offerings to the gods every day. Both Luke and Thalia had made sure to give Artemis a portion of their meals in thanks. The satyr named Grover had also found the trio a few days after their encounter with Artemis. He had been extremely helpful in teaching the trio more about the supernatural world. It was also extremely helpful to have someone who wasn't dyslexic around that could read the street signs. The trio of half-bloods could read the atlas just fine since it was in ancient Greek. They just had trouble figuring out where they physically were in relation to the map. Things had slowly been looking up for Thalia and her friends, with today supposed to be the day they got to Camp Half-Blood. However, it seemed that someone truly had it out for the group in general and her in particular. Over a dozen monsters had blocked the group's way to Camp Half-Blood and they wouldn't let them sneak around them. Thalia and Luke ended up taking guard duty while Grover carried Annabeth so they could move faster. It had been a simple plan of them just booking it for the camp while she and Luke protected everyone from incoming monster attacks. However, the fates could be a real pack of bitches as Luke ended up tripping on a root and breaking his ankle. Thalia had made the call then and there on that hill to buy her friends time to escape. Annabeth and Grover carried Luke away while she held off the monsters. Thalia had been sure she was going to die on that hill. Just as she was on her last dregs of strength, a lightning bolt appeared out of the clear sky and struck her. Was this her end? Thalia couldn't describe the next several seconds. She doubted that anyone had ever created words that would adequately describe it. Then for a split second Thalia had a vision of something. It might have been an old man, but what kind of old man has horns and 3 eyes? The next thing Thalia knew, she was falling through the air and her fear of heights kicked into overdrive. No one would ever be able to get her to admit that she screamed like the proverbial scared little girl she completely did not feel like at that moment. Thalia closed her eyes praying for someone to save her. A sudden thud caused Thalia to open her eyes in shock. She found herself looking into surprised blue eyes, making her wonder what was happening. Thalia then became aware of the 2 arms wrapped around her back holding her steady. Next her eyes spotted parts of a horse and wings in her peripheral vision. However, the most shocking thing for Thalia was the feel of her lips pressed against a stranger's. The adrenaline rush quickly left Thalia, causing her to collapse from exhaustion. This left the duo lying on Narsa's back with Naruto sandwiched between the horse and an unconscious Thalia. Naruto was somehow able to finagle the reins with one of his feet so that his Pegasus landed on the ground. Chapter 4. Thalia opened her eyes to find herself in an unknown room. She soon discovered that she was in a hospital room. A strange and yet somehow familiar voice called to her from the side. "Take it easy, Thalia. You've been through a rough experience." The speaker looked to Thalia like a supermodel. She had long crimson hair, violet eyes, and a figure that her mother would have cheerfully committed murder to have. Moreover, the woman radiated confidence, power, and compassion that made you know in your bones that you were safe. Thalia looked at the woman and asked, "Who are you? Where am I? Are my friends safe?" With a smile the woman said, "I'm going to need you to trust me, Thalia. There is a lot I need to tell you and I don't have much time to tell you. Annabeth, Luke, and the Satyr were able to make it safely into Camp Half-Blood thanks to you holding off those monsters. The monsters were going to kill you and our father tried to turn you into a tree. However, a god from this realm instead pulled you from Earth to this world. I don't know why yet as I haven't gotten permission to speak to him. Don't ask how, Thalia. You are in another world sort of like those kids in the Narnia stories. Currently, we are in a village called Konoha and it like everywhere else in this world is inhabited by people. I've called in some favors and you will be looked after. Now I'm going to have to leave soon, but I've left a letter that will have some more explanations for you. Once I leave, a man by the name of Inoichi is going to come in and use a jutsu, think of them like spells, on you, so that you will be able to speak the local language." Thalia cut in and said, "Who are you?" This wasn't making any sense to her. How could she be in another world? Her sister, who she didn't know she had arranged for her to be looked after. If she really was in another world then how did her supposed sister know what happened to her? The woman smiled and said, "We've met before, Thalia, although I was in my preferred true form at the time, instead of my avatar in this world that you see now. You and Luke were right in your assumptions about the trap-making book." Thalia's eyes widened in shock as the woman disappeared in a swirl of leaves. A few seconds later the door to the hospital room opened and Thalia saw a tall blonde-haired man she assumed was Inoichi walk into the room. Inoichi slowly walked closer to Thalia and then gently laid a hand on her forehead. Thalia nervously watched as Inoichi closed his eyes and then she felt like someone took a rusty electrified drill bit to her forehead. Her brain became flooded with images and ideas. Soon Thalia started to make connections in her mind as new words appeared to describe basic things. Thalia gritted her teeth while trying to cope with the thunderous migraine she was feeling. The new words in her mind started to connect into simple sentences and the more complex ones. She started to connect meanings for the symbols now dancing in her head. The sheer number and complexity of the kanji was hard for her to follow, but it was now in her mind. Finally, the agony ended when Inoichi opened his eyes and took his hand away from Thalia's forehead. Inoichi looked down at Thalia and said, "How are you feeling?" Thalia looked up at him and replied, "Like hell." "Wait a minute, I can understand you and speak your language." Inoichi nodded his head and replied, "The pain will last for a few hours, even with the pain meds you'll be given after the doctor's final look over. It's why my family prefers to not use that particular jutsu." Inoichi carefully hid the pain on his own face. While the user of the jutsu didn't feel as much pain as the recipient, they were still left with a migraine from using that jutsu. Thalia closed her eyes to dim the pain coursing through her head. She knew that Artemis had really helped her out, but she still didn't know much about her situation. Hell, she didn't even know what these people knew about Greek mythological world. Thalia asked, "Who was the lady who was in here before you?" She said I was to be looked after, but she didn't go into any details. That was a question with an answer that Inoichi was still trying to wrap his head around. Minato and Kushina weren't just in the service of a kami. They were avatars of a kami. It was an awe-inspiring and frightening thought to comprehend. Inoichi could see why the Hokage had gotten permission from the kami to obscure this fact. It was also frightening to see what the mixing of divine and human blood caused in the offspring. Naruto had frightening chakra reserves for an adult, let alone for the child he was. Inoichi could sense that Thalia had similar chakra reserves to Naruto. It made him feel a little inadequate. Hopefully Arashi could look after the girl properly. He was already doing a good job with Naruto and Karen. Konoha did not need a chakra juggernaut going on a rampage. Inoichi answered Thalia's question before she repeated it. "I don't know the kami's name from your land that you talked with. However, I do know that her avatar in this land was known as Kushina Uzumaki. You'll be under the care of Arashi Kazama, who is looking after the surviving members of the Uzumaki clan. In fact, it was Kushina's son Naruto Uzumaki who saved you when you fell out of that tear in the sky." Thalia suddenly remembered landing on someone and accidentally kissing them. That person had saved her. She then remembered what Inoichi had said and her headache increased. Artemis's son had saved her. Artemis had a kid. Thalia collapsed from shock and hoped that when she woke up things would make more sense. Naruto and Karen were sitting in the hospital's waiting room waiting for Arashi to return. The trio had rushed Thalia to the hospital and then had to stay while she was treated and her appearance investigated. Both preteens were wondering what was going on since they had seen the Hokage come rushing into the hospital. Hiruzen had grilled the duo for everything they could recall about Thalia's appearance and then disappeared down the closed doors with Arashi. To pass the time, the duo snagged a copy of the Shinobi Bulletin that was generating so much talk among the older people in the hospital. Karen had to use the puppy eyes jutsu in order to get a copy. Rather unusual since typically there were enough copies available for anyone to read. Karen set the snagged bulletin on a table so she and Naruto could share. Both Uzumakis were soon left scratching their heads. This is the controversy. The Hokages added an additional classification system for shinobi. Karen couldn't see why people were so upset like the others in the waiting room suggested. Konoha, like all shinobi villages, used ranking system that the Nidaime Hokage got the Shodaime to pass when the village was founded. Before Tobarama's invention of Genin, Chunin, Takubetsu Jonin and Jonin, there were no ninja classifications. Clan leaders were expected to know the skills their clan members had in order to choose who to send on a mission. The sheer size of the new village's manpower pool, which was a fraction of what Konoha could now boast, required a classification system. Over the following decades, the informal letter ranking system was added based on the mission rank it was expected to be needed to kill a shinobi. The two combined systems were useful, but still very flawed as the bulletin clearly laid out. Naruto looked at the section showing the flaws of the system and spoke. Maybe this is the reason everyone's so upset. If I'm reading this correct, then over 2,000 shinobis died and another 9,000 were crippled during the shinobi wars because they were sent on missions that their skills weren't suited for. This mainly happened when field commands were set up because the commanders didn't know what their subordinates could do. Karen quickly read ahead of Naruto and nodded her head. That's exactly what happened, Naruto. It says here that what often happened was that a mission would come in and be given to a ninja that had the appropriate rank and the ninja couldn't protest their abilities because they had the rank and the command centers were short-staffed. All that senseless loss of life. Karen knew that there were risks in the shinobi lifestyle. Arashi had made sure that both his charges were aware of that fact. However, she was taught that sacrifice should be extremely costly for the enemy. That meant that people for a job had to be sent on the job. Unfortunately, that hadn't happened because the commanders didn't know who was best for a job. The article in the bulletin went on to state that such tragedies were inevitable with the current system since it had a built-in assumption that the groups were small enough that any commander would know his troops' abilities. It was a flawed assumption that Hiruzen mentioned he hadn't been aware of until some analysts he had tasked with reviewing mission records for areas of improvement brought it to his attention. Naruto rested his eyes for a moment before battling with katakana again. He turned to Karen and said, "So what is this new classification system we'll be learning after summer break is over?" Karen quickly read the rest of the article so she could summarize it and passed the bulletin on to another person eager to read it. The new system leaves the old system in place when it comes to ranks and command structures. However, the new system now classifies shinobi based on what their skills and training are focused on doing. There are 11 different classifications of shinobi now. However, one is simply a classification of fresh genin who don't know enough to merit one of the other classifications. The 11 classifications are Explorators, Limitinae, Comitatensis, Preventers, Palatina, Numeroi, Cataphractarii, Clibanarii, Carabisionoi, Excubators, and Foderati. There were also 4 grades to these classifications. Velites, Hastati, Principes, and Trieri. These new grades will show how skilled a shinobi is in each classification. This addition to the classification is so a shinobi that is trained in more than one area can be used effectively. The last bit of the article mentions that one of the grades means that a shinobi really isn't trained for the mission type of the classification and should be used only as a last resort. Naturally, there is no mention of what each classification is for or the skill levels that each grade signifies. I hope they teach us what those classifications are in class when we get back. I don't have the slightest clue what those classifications are from their names. By the sage, where did the Hokage even get those words? Naruto grinned and said, from my parents. Both the classifications and the grades come from the Roman Empire. The classifications are from the Dominate era if I remember correctly. The grades are from the Pre-Marian Reform Army. I can guess a few of the classifications based off of how the Romans used those troops. But I'd have to recheck the books to be sure and the Hokage could have just pulled the names and randomized what they'd mean in the new classification. The grandfatherly voice cut into the duo's discussion. Interesting theory on information security, Naruto. Both Naruto and Karen turned around to see Hiruzen standing behind them. However, it wasn't necessary. I chose to use Roman units for the classifications so that our enemies wouldn't know how our shinobi will be classified for some time. They'll eventually deduce which classification is suited for what role. Until then, it will be an added layer of security if they steal any deployment documents. We have limited source documents on the new classifications, and the pool of those who have seen those documents is very small. You'll find, Naruto, that after a certain point paranoia can be detrimental. This is especially true regarding something that will be relatively open knowledge. Besides, the grading of the classification adds another level of protection for our ninjas. Let's use the following hypothetical situation. Say years from now, after you graduate, you start to get a reputation in shinobi world. It becomes known that you're classified as an explorators and a limitine. However, you are a hastati in one and a principes in another. Those grades are kept on limited records and not openly talked about outside of mission briefings. Because of this, enemy ninjas won't know which set of tasks you're better at or just how good you are at that specific role. This might not hold up as well if you develop a famous reputation. However, anyone with such a reputation typically has the skills to make it inadvisable to attack them. Hiruzen discreetly glanced around at all the other people in the room who were pretending not to listen in. Adding the new classification and grade system was going to be controversial. Even Hiruzen didn't like the idea of modifying the system that his sensei had created even more than it already informally had been. Shinobi dealt in practicalities, as Tobirama always said, and the data the analysts had shown him was clear. There were too many shinobis for the old system to work effectively, so it had to be updated. Hiruzen knew that Tobirama would have been the first to junk his own system and create a new one if he was in command. Hopefully this little speech, like the others he was planning, would help get people to accept the change. Karen looked up at the Hokage and nodded her head. She then said, "Thank you for explaining things, sir." Hiruzen smiled and said, "It was no problem, Karen. Oh, I was talking to Mr. Kazama earlier and he should be out soon with a new guest that will be staying with you. It's the young lady you helped to rescue Naruto." The sun was starting to set when Thalia and Arashi joined up with Naruto and Karen in the hospital lobby. Thalia was nervously dressed in a simple gray outfit that the hospital had provided. Her original clothes were too torn and bloody for the hospital to save. This was fairly common for a ninja hospital, so Thalia simply got one of the standard issue discharge outfits that were on hand. Naruto and Karen quickly walked up to Arashi and Thalia. They then said as one, "Uncle Arashi." Both preteens followed up by nearly tackling Arashi in a hug. Arashi chuckled as he used his arm to hug his honorary niece and nephew in turn. "It's good to see the two of you again. But I think it's time I introduce you to someone else. Say hello to Thalia Grace. She's from the land that the kami your parents work for hails from Naruto. She will be staying with us for the foreseeable future." Both Uzumakas turned to face Thalia and bowed. The set as one. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Thalia Grace." Naruto spoke first as the clan head. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I'm glad to see that you're safe from your arrival." Karen spoke next. "I'm Karen Uzumaki. Let's be friends." Thalia looked at the two and quickly recognized Naruto. A faint blush appeared on Thalia's face as she glanced at Naruto. Thalia then got control of her expression and said, "It's great to meet you as well. Thank you for saving me, Naruto." "No problem, Thalia. Anyone who could have would have saved you. I was just the person available at the time." That was definitely not the case in Thalia's experience. Her life on the run had shown her that most people would rather see someone get hurt than risk troubling themselves to help someone without a reward for it. After all, it was someone else's problem and there were plenty of other people around to help the person in question. Why should they take the problem when it wasn't their job? Thalia found her feet to be very interesting to look at as her cheeks became flush. Naruto saw Thalia looking at her feet and walked up to her. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Thalia. You're safe now that you're in Konoha. Uncle Arashi is a really good guy. He was my mother's teammate back when they were genin. He's looked after Karen and I since the day I was born and he'll look after you now." Arashi looked at the duo and was taken back almost 20 years to when he first saw Kushina looking at Minato after Minato had rescued her from her would-be kidnappers. Back then the sight had filled him with relief and heartache. Kushina had been saved, but by the one guy in class that Arashi didn't want to save her if he couldn't. Now Arashi was trying not to grin in amusement as Yu Lao started to tie the red string on the young duo's fingers. As heartwarming as the scene in front of him was, Arashi knew that they all needed to eat. He spoke up. "I think it's time for all of us to have some dinner. Thalia, what kinds of food do you like to eat? I don't know if we'll have exactly what you're used to. However, I'm sure we can find something that you can enjoy." Thalia was surprised at the question. She replied, "Do you have hamburgers?" The trio from Konoha all looked at each other with puzzled looks. Karen and Arashi quickly focused their gaze on Naruto, who was starting to shake his head. "Don't ask me. None of Mom or Dad's books have mentioned what Western people eat." Arashi spoke as he shook his head. "I really should have considered that the food would be different between our two lands. Thalia, what are hamburgers made of and what ingredients in them do you like the most?" Art of Thalia wanted to curl up in a little ball from embarrassment. She was in a different world and had to have the language shoved into her head so she could talk with the locals. Why should she have thought they might know what a hamburger was? Thalia thought for a moment and said, a hamburger is made from ground beef and bread. Those ingredients actually had a wide variety of options available. Arashi quickly made up his mind. We're going to have some teppanyaki. It's a type of grilling style where meat is served with noodles or more commonly rice along with some vegetables. Beef is one of the common options for the meat. I know of a good family teppanyaki restaurant only a few blocks from here. With that said, Arashi proceeded to lead the group out of the hospital. Thalia wasn't sure what she expected Konoha to look like when she exited the hospital. However, she was shocked when her eyes caught sight of the Hokage monument. Alternate Mount Rushmore really hammered home that she was not in Kansas anymore. Then there were all the buildings. They looked like something out of a ninja movie. That ironically made sense given that this was a ninja village. As the group walked through Konoha they got lots of attention from other people on the street. It soon became apparent to Thalia that she was the one drawing all the attention. This wasn't too surprising given her Caucasian looks which were unheard of in Konoha whose population, ignoring the hair colors, would be labeled as Asian back on Earth. Then you add in the fact that unknown to Thalia she was with the last of the Uzumaki and that everyone in Konoha knew that the spirits of Naruto's parents worked for a foreign kami. On top of this, everyone with fairly decent chakra skills close by could sense the power sleeping in Thalia. This fact was quickly disseminated through the grapevine. Said mutterings did not escape Arashi's sharp ears. He knew that Thalia would attract questions. However, he had hoped that Benzaiten would cut him a break for tonight for Thalia's sake. The girl had already been through so much and now she was left dropped off in a new world with complete strangers looking out for her. Couldn't the girl at least enjoy tonight without being the center of conversation for the village? Arashi quickly led his charges into the teppanyaki restaurant and got them some seats. Two new problems quickly reared their heads for Arashi. First, Thalia was just as bad as Naruto was when it came to reading. Part of Arashi honestly wondered if she was worse than Naruto or if Naruto simply had more practice understanding how his brain flipped kanji around. Inoichi would have a better understanding of the comprehension Thalia now possessed. The second problem was discovered when dinner was served. Thalia didn't know how to use chopsticks. Naruto had to spend several minutes showing Thalia how to hold and use chopsticks. Everyone at the table then had a quick lesson in how to dodge food that was improperly held. Slowly Thalia got the hang of eating with the new utensils and everyone could drop their guard. Arashi led his charges home after dinner was over. Thalia was put in Karen's room for the night. Tomorrow they would clear out one of the storage rooms and turn it into Thalia's new bedroom. The kids headed to bed while Arashi headed to his office. He unsealed a document he had been carrying and placed it in the safe. Hopefully, Kushina's backup plan for Thalia wouldn't need to be enacted to keep Thalia in Konoha. Thalia woke up feeling a set of soft arms firmly holding her. In her half-asleep state, she wondered when Annie got so strong. Yesterday's events then flooded back to her. Thalia's eyes widened and she turned around to see Karen gripping her like a teddy bear. Trying to break free of Karen's grip was a real labor for Thalia. She was eventually able to pry open Karen's arms and slip away. This left the sleepy Karen blindly grabbing in the dark for her missing teddy. Thalia quickly tossed a teddy bear at Karen to take her place, calming the retreat down. The quick look around Karen's room revealed an interesting parody of the typical preteen girl's bedroom Thalia thought of back in America. There was the futon instead of a regular bed. Instead of boy band posters there were charts on weapons. Karen had a dollhouse in one corner. However, this playhouse looked more like a castle and the dolls were far more martial than Barbie and Ken could ever be. The one thing that fit the stereotypical preteen bedroom was the mirror and small makeup kit set in one corner. Normally, Thalia wouldn't be interested in such things. The sheer oddity of it in her mind compared to everything else in the room made the young half-blood take a closer look. It took a minute for Thalia to read the labels. Kanji was not any easier for her to read than English was. Some of the makeup items seemed normal to Thalia. Just because she didn't use it herself didn't mean she was clueless about makeup. However, most of the makeup had warnings of being parts of two-part poisons. All the lipsticks were flat out supposed to paralyze or knock out someone. Thalia was sure that if her mother ever offered her lipstick like that, she would have thought of wearing it. She then decided to leave Karen's room and get a better look at the house she now had to stay in. Thalia had complicated feeling about no longer being a runaway. On the one hand, have a permanent place to stay and guaranteed food was a blessing for her. There had been far too many days when she had gone to bed hungry because she couldn't find enough to eat. Thalia had also spent too many nights freezing from the cold or the rain. On the other hand, her instincts associated staying in one place with danger. Staying in a town for more than a couple of days meant that monsters would start to home in on her. She might be in another world. But that didn't matter to the instincts that had saved her life half a dozen times. The fact that Thalia was now in another world was something she was still trying to come to grips with mentally and emotionally. Tartarus, she wasn't even speaking or reading English anymore, thanks to that trick or rather jutsu cast on her. Thalia only really noticed that she was using a new language when she actually thought about it. Then it was like there was this weird dub when she spoke. She could hear herself speak the fire dialect of Elemental and understand what she said, even when she thought about things in English. The thought suddenly hit Thalia. Was she unable to speak English anymore? Thalia closed her eyes and thought about what she should say. She focused on the words and slowly spoke. I can still speak English. What was that you said, Thalia? The sudden comment spoke Thalia and forced her to not squeak in fright. She turned around and saw Arashi standing in the hallway. Her cheeks started to get flush as Thalia answered the question. I said I can still speak English in English. I realized that I said everything automatically in Elemental and I got curious. Arashi nodded his head and replied, fully understandable, Thalia. The jutsu that Inoichi used didn't remove your original language. Instead, it shifted your mind so that Elemental became your primary language and your old original language become a second language that you know. Now I was getting ready to make breakfast. Would you like to help me, Thalia? There was something in Arashi's tone that, while friendly, made it clear he wanted Thalia to help him. Thalia nodded her head and said, okay. The duo headed to the kitchen where Arashi soon had Thalia chopping up the tofu while he prepped the rice. Arashi waited until Thalia was done cutting the tofu before he had them start on cleaning the carrots. He spoke as they worked together. What kind of career do you want in the future, Thalia? Huh? The half-blood froze in surprise at the question. She wondered where it came from. Arashi looked Thalia in the eye and said, you don't have to worry about how you are going to get food anymore, where you're going to sleep at night, or if a monster is going to attack you anymore. Both your sister and the Hokage placed you as my ward. All of your basic needs are taken care of because I'm here. In all honesty, one of your parents should be handling all of that, letting you be a child while you still can. The fact that they didn't is their failing and the fault lies with them. Your immediate needs, including your new wardrobe that we'll be getting today, are taken care of so you don't have to focus on living day to day. It's time for you to start thinking more long-term. Konoha's schools are currently on break, but we'll get you signed up soon enough. You'll probably be entered into school at a level a year or two lower than your age group. I know it will be insulting to be older than your classmates. But it wouldn't be fair to you to go to school with your age group and be hopelessly behind due to educational differences. At the very least, you need to learn our history and geography. From what Kushina said, you are probably less than stellar in your other academic subjects as well. There was a tiny crackle of lighting around Thalia as the tips of her ears turned red. Arashi put his carrots down, dried his hand, and then put it on Thalia's shoulder. Thalia, there is no shame in whatever your previous academic scores were. Kushina mentioned that the schools in your old land were not set up to support people with your learning challenges. Konoha isn't the best when it comes to those challenges. But Naruto also has those challenges and I've learned how to help him learn. It will be the same with you. However, in order for me to help you, I need to know what kind of career you want, as our schools in Konoha start focusing on career paths early. That doesn't stop someone from going into a career their school didn't prep them for. It just means that it is much more difficult for someone. I can say that truthfully because it happened to me. This wound, Arashi paused to gesture with his stump of an arm, forced me out of the shinobi career and into being a merchant. I had trouble for many months with aspects of working at a business that someone who studied at the merchant schools would know by heart when they graduated. Strong, Thalia blurted out. I want to be strong. My friends nearly died and now I can't see them anymore because I wasn't strong enough to fight off the monsters. I don't want to be in that position ever again. Arashi nodded his head and said, if that is the case you would have to attend the Ninja Academy. However, I won't sign you up for the academy just yet, Thalia. Your emotions from your fight before coming to Konoha are still too raw. I don't want you to make a sudden decision and regret it later. Think about what you want to do or achieve in life for the next week while we get you used to living in Konoha. Once a week has passed, I'll take you down to get signed up at the Ninja Academy if you still want to pursue that path. In the meantime, I want you to relax and have fun. You and I will be having some classes before school starts so you have some basic knowledge about Konoha and the Land of Fire. We don't want some jealous, insecure classmate trying to cause problems for you over basic facts that you honestly shouldn't be expected to know just yet. However, your main lesson is going to be relearning how to be a kid without the weight of the world on your shoulders. Chapter 5. Time flew by for Thalia ever since she had arrived in Konoha. Days became weeks, which in turn became months of happiness and joy for the young half-blood. Arashi's words were correct, she had learned to be a kid again. No longer did Thalia have to worry about where her next meal would come, who might try to take advantage of a kid, or what monster would attack her. She also wasn't shunned for her situation, and she didn't have to hide her abilities. Thalia could truly be herself unlike any time in her past on Earth. Here there were people to help her and friends to hang out with. Sure, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Thalia was the foreign girl, and that would probably never change given her different looks. It didn't help that Thalia had no clue about Konoha's pop culture like a girl her age was expected to know. She also had been slotted with Naruto and Karen in school, putting her a year behind what was expected for her age. Many of the friendships at school had already been formed and transfers weren't really common, so Thalia was this odd graft onto the academy school social life. That was still infinitely better than how things had been for Thalia back on Earth before she ran away. She didn't have ditzes trying to cozy up to her for her mother's fame while also tearing her apart when they thought she was out of earshot. No one made fun of her for being behind in several courses because who could expect someone from so far away to know about Konoha and the elemental countries. Besides, the few bimbos who had managed to survive the academy when Thalia joined quickly put her in the do not mess with category. Thalia was just supposed to keep the fact that she was a half-blood secret. Her half-blood abilities on the other hand were allowed and even encouraged to be displayed. Her superhuman strength and speed combined with her natural lighting powers were formidable and well above Konoha's average for her age group. Throw in her years of combat experience, and Thalia was the undisputed queen of female combat at the academy and could give the boys a serious run for their money. It was liberating to not have to hide so much of herself. Things that would have shocked and startled people back on Earth were barely given a second thought here in Konoha. Occasionally, an instructor would comment on how advanced Thalia's abilities were for someone entering the academy so late. Those comments were easily deflected by her mentioning that her father was known in her homeland for being powerful and that she had several years of training against local wild animals before coming to Konoha. That answer got teachers to stop wondering about her abilities. They all knew that Thalia was only a late addition to the academy because she accidentally ended up in Konoha due to an unknown jutsu. Her education appeared patchy in places, but that was easy to explain. Thalia soon became an interesting curiosity for many of the teachers. She'd never have the best book scores. However, all of her teachers were privately convinced that Thalia would do wonders once she graduated and became a shinobi. Maybe she could be part of a crop of new kunwaichis for girls to look up to in the future. Kami knew that the girls in the academy needed new role models to look up to among the shinobi ranks. Final year at the academy was the best for Thalia. Here classes shifted from a balance of academic and martial classes to being weighted for martial classes. It was also when the students could pick a primary and a secondary type to focus on in the additional school hours that were added in the final year. Thalia chose to study Numroi as her primary type with Preventers as her secondary. Numroi were shinobi who focused of offensive urban combat. Preventers were shinobi who focused on urban scouting and urban sabotage tactics. The academy still made sure that all its students had the basics for the kinds of situations its students could find themselves in as future shinobi. Thalia still had to take a number of wilderness survival courses even though she planned to focus on working in cities. It wouldn't do for her or her fellow Numroi to die because they had to retreat into the woods and got lost dying because they didn't know how to find their way out or get food. The intention of the Hiruzen classification as it was becoming known in Konoha was to help the field commanders and the paper pushers. It was not meant to pigeonhole future shinobi's abilities. Academy gossip confirmed with outside sources stated that the new classes were added on to the older classes and didn't replace a single class. About the only real problem Thalia had with the Ninja Academy was that she was required to wear a uniform every day to school. Even that wasn't really much of a problem since there was a practical point to making the students wear their uniforms. It was to get them comfortable with wearing the armor that could save their lives in the future. That was something Thalia could get behind even if the armor itself felt out of place. It was a weird feeling for Thalia. She liked wearing armor. It was like a comfort blanket to her knowing that even if she was attacked without warning she could be protected. The problem for Thalia was with the armor she had to wear. Something about the Namikaze-style armor just felt off for her. Perhaps the best way to put it was that while she should be in armor, her instinct said it should have been a different style of armor. Maybe it was a Greek demigod thing. Anyway, it was a feeling that Thalia had trained herself to ignore. Thalia glanced over to Naruto and Karen who were walking with her towards the academy for the finals. Her heart stupidly skipped a beat when she saw Naruto smiling as he and Karen talked about a seal array. The armor never seemed to bother Naruto like it did her, which caused Thalia to wonder over an old question she had mulled over many times. Was Naruto apparent ease in his armor due to long practice, or did it have something to do with his Roman side? Finding out about the schizophrenic nature of the gods had been a surprise for Thalia. Naruto wasn't just the son of Artemis. He was also the son of her Roman side Diana. The whole Greek-Roman divide and separation that the gods enforced surprised Thalia when she first found out about it. Arashi had freely shared the information with Thalia since Naruto was both Greek and Roman. Besides, that was a situation on another world and it wasn't like they were suddenly expecting Thalia to be whisked off back to Earth. Maybe it was because of her distance or lack of information about the times when the two sides knew each other existed. However, Thalia thought that the separation was rather dumb. Her annoyance about the Greek and Roman situation was centered on one god. Her father. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the reason why her father was acting odd shortly before Jason came around was because Jupiter had been visiting her mother instead of Zeus. That left a Greek and a Roman half-blood as siblings, which was a big forbidden thing under her father's laws. Thalia figured that that was why Jason suddenly vanished when he was 2 years old. She lost her brother because her father couldn't keep his form straight when he went for a booty call. Thalia figured she had the right to be bitter with her father over that genius move. The only reason Thalia wasn't lightning-throwing furious at her old man was hope. Naruto had let Thalia read his texts on the Roman half-bloods that his father had given him. Those texts indicated that the Romans focused more on group tactics rather than individual heroics. Thalia hoped that meant that the Romans had picked up Jason after her mother abandoned him at that burnt-out ruin. Hopefully, Jason was having a good life in New Rome protected by those soldiers. Aaron turned to face Thalia and asked, "Hey Thalia. Are you ready for the physicals for us to graduate?" A grin appeared on Thalia's face. "Yep. We've got through the hardest part of the exams and it's all downhill from here for us." Naruto chuckled and replied, "Agreed Thalia. Those written tests were an absolute nightmare." "And yet," Karen cut in, "both of you are doing well on the written parts. Thalia's academic standing in the graduating class is only so low because she's missing 3 years for the cumulative weight of her academic performance. Besides, the practical exams are weighted more than the theoretical exams. Thalia will pass just fine, and you Mr. are currently in the running for Rookie of the Year." "I still think you're exaggerating Karen. Those language tests and code cipher tests were brutal. If those don't knock me out of the running for Rookie then the grammar test certainly will. Naruto would like to be Rookie of the Year. It would be a nice kunai in his pocket." However, Naruto didn't expect it to happen. He would no doubt dominate the other boys in the physical exams. It's just that his book studies would shoot down his chances. Aaron turned to her cousin and lightly smacked his forehead with 2 fingers. "Don't be such a downer Naruto. Uncle Arashi has ensured you know enough to pass all the academic courses just fine. You just need to focus on doing the best you can and you just might make it as the rookie." Alright Karen, I'll give it my best shot." The trio arrived at the academy just as Naruto said this. They then headed towards the floor in the second major building of the academy where their classes were held. Karen had to split off from Naruto and Thalia because she belonged to a different class in their year. Konoha liked to mix the clan members up when practical in the academy to get everyone used to working with each other. It was an old practice from the village's founding to try and get everyone to not view other clans as potential enemies. Thalia and Naruto arrived at their classroom to see that they were some of the early arrivals. They parted ways as they each sat at different areas of the classroom's lecture pit. Naruto quickly struck up a conversation with several of his nearby classmates. Thalia was forced to endure overhearing a couple of the nearby girls gossiping. What made things even worse for Thalia was that they were talking about Sasuke Uchiha. What her classmates saw in him Thalia couldn't say. He was somewhat handsome, but not noticeably more than any other boy in school. She deliberately ignored the small voice in her head that said there was one particular boy in school who beat Sasuke in looks hands down. Sasuke was one of the leading students in the year, but he wasn't the undisputed #1 in the academy. It certainly wasn't the boy's attitude as that was cold and withdrawn. Not that Thalia could really blame Sasuke for his bad attitude. Coming home from training to find out that your father had murdered everyone in your clan except for your older brother who was away on a mission at the time would mess anyone up. To top it off, apparently Sasuke's limeball of a father used some sort of genjutsu to torture Sasuke to the point he was in a coma for several days to a week. The exact time varied depending on who told the story and Thalia didn't want to know the truth. Just a few more days. Thalia told herself. She just had to put up with the gossip a few more days and then she could graduate. It was extremely unlikely that she would be on the same team as these airheads and then she could focus on becoming a better ninja. The power needed to ensure that those she cared about would stay safe and the wisdom to use that power would be hers. Iruka walked down the halls of the academy towards his class to give them the start of their practical finals. Things sure had changed since Iruka went through the academy as a student. The Hokage had really shaken things up since his second reign began. Would the Yondaime have done similar reforms? It was an interesting question since many of the items that had triggered the reforms were sent by the Yondaime to Konoha in return for his services to that foreign kami in the afterlife. The Chunin stopped to look down at his armored uniform under his Chunin jacket. The Yondaime had sent the original so he obviously recognized the value of the armor. Iruka would probably be sporting a massive scar on his face or be dead if it wasn't for the shield he carried. No way was Iruka going to lament about how things were in the good old days, like some retired ninjas did. He quickly decided that the Yondaime would have recognized the need for reforms and would have found a way to reform Konoha. It would have obviously drawn from other influences if the Yondaime had been alive, but things would have changed nonetheless. With a small shake of his head, Iruka pulled his mind back to the present. He could muse on what-ifs later. Iruka completed his walk to his classroom and entered it. All of the students who were talking immediately shut up while those who weren't in their seats quickly rushed to them. Everyone was sitting at attention by the time Iruka made it to his desk. Iruka turned to look at his students and gave them a quick visual inspection. Everyone was wearing their armor and their visible gear was as it should be. Iruka used a jutsu without seals to adjust the volume of his voice and said, "Good morning, students." As one of the students replied, "Sir, good morning, sir." Iruka nodded his head and said, "At ease, students. As you know, your practical exams are on our schedule for this week. The fact that you all have made it this far without having someone held back is a compliment to your determination as students. However, you will soon find out that the easy exams were held last week. As part of the increased difficulty, you will only have a lunch break for today. For the rest of the week during the exams you will have to sneak in snack and water breaks as you can. Despite rumors to the contrary, this limitation is not out of some malice we teachers hold for our students. This is to simulate battlefield conditions where you cannot take a half hour for a meal and have to eat on the run. The academy will have standard combat field ration packs available for you to pick up at the end of each day. You will get only one ration pack each day for use on the following day. Furthermore, the ration packs will only be available for pickup in the cafeteria for 1 hour after the last standard test is scheduled to be over. Do not delay on the tests or you will have to buy a ration pack from one of the stores in town or pack your own. Keep this in mind if you are attempting the extra credit portion of the last test of the day. Iruka heard some groans from some of his students and his face became hard. Now was not the time for the kind and caring teacher everyone was used to in class. This time called for Iruka to prove why he earned the right to be a chunin. There will be no complaints out of any of you on this matter. I shouldn't have to remind any of you of this, but you are undergoing tests to become ninja of Konoha. We required a minimum ability to plan ahead or to properly improvise out of shinobi. Ideally, you should have both abilities. We will make a small exception out of genin hopefuls if you show ability in at least one field. Now that we have covered that issue, I want to review the upcoming week's activities with you. 2 days will have 4 different tests, 2 days will have 2 tests, and 1 day will have a single test that will last all day. What days these tests or their exact nature will be kept secret until the test starts. You are Shinobis the Unknown is the 4th member of your team. Additionally, there will be 1 to 3 bonus objectives spread through the tests as extra credits. These extra credit portions, along with several hidden test parameters fit for Konoha Shinobi, will be what determines your placement after the tests are complete. If you score high enough on the bonus objectives you will be placed on a team with a chance to study under a jonin after graduation. Should you not score high enough or fail the jonin's personal test, you will be placed on a genin team assigned to a chunin. Back when Iruka had been a genin, the shinobi program used to assign everyone to jonins with the expectation that most genins would fail the jonin test and then be reassigned to chunin advisors. The threat of going back to the academy or of being dropped from the shinobi program altogether was supposed to be a motivator to get the best out of the hopefuls who would eventually study under jonins. It was an empty threat since anyone who had passed the academy's tests didn't need remedial lessons and no one was going to drop from the shinobi program. Konoha had invested 5 years of resources into putting these kids through the academy. The Hokage was going to get his investment back. However, the Hokage had changed this process as part of his academy reforms. Self-deception among Konoha's shinobi was to be sharply discouraged. It had initially been introduced as a way for ninjas to practice their deception and lie detection skills. The post-Danzo revolt study determined that several deception tests in the shinobi force was a contributing factor to Danzo and gaining so many resources. Hiruzen shut down all such practices on the investigator's suggestion. If you weren't allowed to know information you were no longer given a cover story. A shinobi was told that you weren't authorized to access that information at the current time. Iruka gave an order. Form up for inspection now. The students formed up in rows for inspection like he ordered them to do. Iruka walked down the 3 rows of students and was pleased to see that no one would have to be docket points for not having their complete uniform on. He then returned to the head of the class and said, "We will not proceed to field 4 to start our testing." On the double students. But that said, Iruka started jogging out of the classroom with his students behind him in their assigned marching lines. Naruto carefully walked off some stiffness from the day's tests as he tended his garden. Uncle Arashi insisted that all his charges have at least one hobby that wasn't directly related to their future shinobi lifestyle. It was to be a coping mechanism in the future when their careers really kicked off. Uncle Arashi did bonsai. He had also told the trio that Minato had taken up wood carving, while Kushina had poetry as her hobby. In fact, several of her haikus had been added to the daimyo's collection for official court recital. The faint sound of a Ryuteki playing a strange tune could be heard in the garden if Naruto kept his ears open. He paused in mixing some potting soil to listen to the tune. There were several brief pauses as if the player was not completely sure how they were to continue the song. Then the tune looped back with slightly more confidence on the part of the musician. Naruto listened to the tune again, trying to see if he could place it. Whatever song was being played was definitely not one of the traditional songs that people played on the Ryuteki. Naruto wasn't even sure if the song being played was even meant for any flute variant. Parts of the tune were obviously missing something. Perhaps the song was written to be played with multiple instruments. If he had studied some music theory, then perhaps Naruto could be certain. Such details really weren't important at the moment. What mattered to Naruto was that Thalia was playing her Ryuteki reasonably well and he could enjoy the song. Thalia wasn't the best musician around. Don't get Naruto wrong, Thalia was a good enough musician and she played decently for her skill level. It's just that she started several years after many classmates that Naruto knew played instruments, and it showed. Few people outside of the household even knew that Thalia had taken up an instrument. She wasn't in the academy band and she never brought a Ryuteki to school like many of the girls who played instruments did. Karen claimed that it was the girls trying to show off how feminine they could be, given that the older methods of using outfits in class couldn't happen. Maybe Karen was correct and that would explain Thalia's unusual behavior with the Ryuteki. Naruto couldn't ever recall a time when Thalia acted like a girly girl. Her regular outfits were focused on being durable. Sure, she looked amazing in her regular outfits out of class, but looks were not the driving force in her selection. That was something Naruto could attest to since Uncle Arashi brought him along whenever Karen or Thalia needed to go clothes shopping. Shopping with Thalia was far better and much faster for Naruto than shopping with Karen. The fact that Thalia didn't act like a girly girl was one of the many things Naruto liked about her. He couldn't see why so many of his classmates got excited about the actresses appearing in the movies at the movie theater. Or why they were so eager to see the girls completely dressed up in formal kimonos during the festivals. On the one hand, he might still be too young for those topics. On the other hand, the fact that his parents were incarnations of the goddess of tomboys might have something to do with it. Thalia ended her song, ending the trance she had accidentally placed Naruto under. Naruto shook his head and returned to mixing some potting soil as Thalia practiced her music scales. The mix Naruto was working on was for one of his amaranths. Amaranth varieties along with mugwort, jasmine, and vervain made up the vast bulk of Naruto's garden. The particular variety of amaranths Naruto was preparing to pot were grown for their seeds. Naruto had taken to using offerings made from amaranth flower when he offered sacrifice to his parents ever since he found out about the plant's connection to them. Given his limited supplies, Naruto had taken to using amaranth flower mainly in Kanjo ceremonies. The knowledge that his parents were avatars of a kami was spreading throughout Konoha. Too many people had witnessed too many incidents over the years to keep that knowledge hidden. The Yamanakas had been the first to request a Kanjo ceremony of Naruto so that Diana Artemis could be added to their clan's shrine. Then came the former Genin team that had been there when the unicorns and Pegasi were gifted to Konoha. Word of mouth did the rest after that on spreading the news. People who weren't even in on the knowledge about the avatars were sending in Kanjo requests to Naruto. A kami of hunting, wilderness, fertility, and childbirth was something many citizens of Konoha found appealing. Because of Kushina and Minato's actions in life, those in the know had started spreading certain emphasis on his parents' Greek and Roman names. Artemis was being associated with the defensive aspects of her domains, while Diana was being associated with the offensive aspects of her domains. Naruto knew his parents were keeping an eye on the situation as they had sent him a letter on what they wanted him to do about the whole situation. They limited the Kanjo ceremony to being performed once on the full moon and on the new moon. The Kanjo crown for the ceremony was to be made fresh each time using grasses and other plants from the training grounds they had used as Kushina and Minato. Only the Uzumaki shrine and its altar could be used for the Kanjo ceremony, and only in Uzumaki was allowed to perform the ceremony. Finally, their essence when enshrined at its new shrine was to be enshrined as Artemis equals Diana. There had been grumbling among some people when news of the restrictions became public. Those grumblings were quieted down when Hiruzen issued an edict giving Artemis and Diana's restrictions the force of law. It was pointed out that breaking a kami's request when trying to get the kami's aid was rather foolish. After that, the grumblings mostly focused on how long it would people to get the kami added to their personal shrines, given the bottleneck on Kanjo ceremonies. Arashi was able to find a solution to get the complainers off of Naruto's back. Kanjo ceremonies held on the full moon were given to people on a list that was first come, first serve. The recipient of the Kanjo ceremonies held on the new moon were to be selected randomly from the list via lottery. This eased many complaints since the ceremonies would already be booked for the next decade, even if both dates for the ceremonies had been just given over to the list. Naruto finished the potting soil mix and got one of his larger pots. He filled it partially with the soil and then got the amaranth that needed to be transferred. Naruto lifted the amaranth with great care out of its old pot and gently placed it in the new pot. Then he added more soil to fill in the pot. Once that plant was taken care of, Naruto looked around to see what else he needed to work on. Karen's voice filled the house at that moment. 10 minutes, heads up everyone. We have 10 minutes until dinner is ready. That ended any plans of continuing to work in his garden for Naruto. He quickly cleaned up his work area and headed in to wash his hands. Thalia was barreling down the hall just as Naruto exited the washroom. The duo avoided colliding with each other when Thalia jumped up and kicked against the wall to rocket out of the way. "Sorry Naruto," Thalia called out, trying not to show her embarrassment at nearly hitting him. Arashi poked his head out of the house office and shot Thalia a quick glare. "Thalia Grace. You know rules." Thalia turned around to face Arashi and bowed her head. "I'm sorry Uncle Arashi. I know better than to run in the house." Arashi looked at Thalia and said, "You should know better since you will become a genin after you complete this week's tests at the academy. I know that it's harder for you to control your impulses than it is for regular children due to your ADHD. However, you've got to control your impulses better or it could get you seriously hurt in the future. Your desert privileges are revoked for a week and you have solo dishwashing duty for all meals for the rest of the week." Naruto discreetly took another route to the kitchen while Thalia looked down at her feet in embarrassment. Arashi walked over to Thalia and gently placed his hand on her shoulder reassuringly. "Hey Thalia, never forget that you're a good girl and growing up into a wonderful woman that any man would be proud to call his daughter. You've got your points that need to worked on just like we all do. I'm still working on my problems and I've got plenty to keep me busy for the next several decades." Tears started to form in Thalia's eyes. "I'm sorry for disappointing you uncle." Arashi leaned down and also gently lifted Thalia's chin so that they could look into each other's eyes. "Thalia, you haven't disappointed me. If you weren't actively using your chakra that would be a different story. Children who know how to use their chakra are naturally more energetic and excitable than children who never use chakra. That is a medical fact. Based off of you and Naruto, it seems divine blood only increases those traits. I've seen you control your impulses and I can somewhat imagine how hard it is for you to keep still at times. It's just that you are going to be a full-fledged ninja soon. I'm worried for you that a slip of your control in the field will get you or a teammate hurt. I don't want either of those things to happen to you. Even when you live through such a mistake it can still cost you." Arashi let go of Thalia's chin to tap the stump of his severed right arm. Thalia's eyes were drawn to the stump and she felt her blood chill at the thought of getting injured like that or causing a teammate to get up in Arashi's condition. Her imagination easily allowed her to picture Naruto, Karen, Luke or Annie in such a condition. With a faint whisper she said, "I understand." Arashi put his hand on Thalia's shoulder again and said, "I know you do Thalia. The situation has been addressed, the necessary reprimands made, and your punishment decided. It's time to let this matter rest and for us to go enjoy the wonderful meal that Karen has made. The Kami knows she can cook better on a bad day than I can on my best day." Chapter 6. The fifth and final day of Konoha's Ninja Academy's exam week was known as the Crush Day. It was the day when the examiners took off the kids' gloves that they had been using and threw everything at the genin hopefuls. Thalia knew for a fact that the examiners threw everything since she had seen an exploding sink thrown at some fangirls, complaining on how hard the test was before the skink took them out. Ala and Karen walked towards the showers caked in sweat and their clothes a uniform brown from the baked-on mud in their own waste. Every muscle in their body ached, both girls were running on fumes, they were mortified at their condition, and they wanted to curse the Hokage for coming up with this revised test. As the living dead crawled to the showers in the setting sun far behind them, Thalia turned to Karen and grinned. "We did it Karen. We're shinobi now." Karen returned the grin and said, "You're right Thalia. We crushed the crush. I was honestly afraid when they told us yesterday to report to the academy at midnight in full gear to start the day's test. Did you see the look on the instructor's face when we both reached the finish line? I don't think he was expecting us to reach that point for another half hour. Then we went on to beat the final bonus test." Among the moaning behind the duo, one girl found the strength to bitch. "Chakra freaks should just die." The girls ignored the jealous complainer and made it to the showers. They turned on the showers and started to clean up. It took a while to clean up given how caked on all the grim was and just how sore they were. It took Thalia several minutes for the shower to relax her muscles, enough to bend everywhere she needed to in order to scrub. Thalia hadn't felt this sore since the day she was sent to Konoha. Pride started to fill her heart now that she was cleaning herself up. She had done it and become a shinobi. There was the official swearing in on Monday where she would receive her ceremonial forehead protector. But that was just minor paperwork and a proverbial rubber stamp. Sure, someone in the Hokage's tower would decide over the weekend if she should be given a shot at Jonin instruction or left in the hands of the Chunin. Thalia couldn't bring herself to care at the moment. Jonin instruction was the fast track to increasing one's power and rank, but just as many Jonins had come up through the ranks on the Chunin instruction path as under Jonins. Thalia ended her shower and headed for the locker rooms just as several of the other girls made it into the showers. She changed into the civilian clothes that Arashi had advised everyone to bring and then slowly made her way towards the front door. Karen followed after Thalia with too much energy for someone who had survived the crush. Irideed spoke as she caught up to Thalia. "Where do you think Naruto is?" With a slight pout Thalia answered, "He's probably somewhere out front catching some moonlight since last night was a full moon. I wouldn't be surprised if Naruto's chakra reserves are already topped off, even given how massive they are." Thalia knew that she and Karen had unnaturally large chakra reserves for their age and gender. Naruto's reserves were larger than theirs, but in standard male to female chakra reserve ratio. Thalia couldn't really complain about her own chakra reserves since hers surpassed many full-grown Kunoichis. She could be jealous of the fact that one of Naruto's demigod blessings was some sort of lunar recharge. Even the faintest sliver of a crescent moon supercharged his chakra regeneration, and that regeneration became even more enhanced the fuller the moon got. A mischievous look crossed Karen's face as she walked a little closer to Thalia as she then whispered. "Just give it a few years, Thalia. I don't think you'll be complaining about Naruto's abilities to go all through the night then. Well, you might want him to get a concubine to tag in for you from time to time." Thalia blushed to her roots and then hissed Karen. Karen seemed to draw energy from her teasing and she wanted to recharge. "It's not like it's a big secret that you've got the hots for Naruto to anyone who knows you. Well, other than Naruto, and he's a bit dense even for a boy in those regards. You've even got his parents' okay based off of that unused contract Uncle Arashi has stored as a keepsake for you. Besides," Karen's tone took on a somewhat strained and complex vibe as she paused for a moment. Karen shook her head and continued again, "Besides, it's not like most people are expecting you to become his concubine." The "unlike I am" that Karen couldn't vocalize was easily heard by Thalia. Even after several years there were still parts of Konoha's culture that surprised Thalia and also parts that she was shocked she had become accustomed to as normal. Konoha and the Land of Fire's clan-based society had facets that Thalia found odd as an American and even a little weirded out. For example, it was expected for a clan as decimated as the Uzumakis after Danzo's revolt who had survivors of the opposite gender and who weren't as closely related as blood siblings to marry and reform a main branch of the clan. As second cousins, Karen and Naruto technically couldn't marry due to clan traditions, even though it was perfectly acceptable by the Land of Fire's laws. Most people who didn't know Karen and Naruto well simply expected Naruto to take Karen as either his only or as his chief concubine. That they viewed each other as siblings and found the thought of having that kind of relationship disgusting was irrelevant to most people. Thalia found the strength to put a hand on Karen's shoulder and said, "I know what those nobodies have been whispering about has been getting to you, Karen. Things will get better." Karen looked down and clenched her hands into fists. "I doubt that, Thalia. Naruto and I are too easily recognized as the remaining Uzumaki. You're not the one who can't even look at attractive guys with interest unless she wants a running commentary of how shameful she is from random strangers. Remember last month when several of the girls found and rewired the mic, some perv slipped into the locker room to catch the perp. We all heard many of the guys talking about what they thought of our looks before we could identify the scum trying to peep on us." A stormy look crossed Thalia's face. "I was trying to forget that incident." She did not like the fact that several of the creepier former classmates referred to her as an exotic piece of ass. In Thalia's mind there were only two good things to come out of that mess. The first was that the perv who placed the mic was caught and expelled before he could get a camera into the ladies' locker room. The second was that she had overheard Naruto trying to squash that kind of talk about her. Cinderella's role did not sit well with Thalia, but it was comforting to have someone defend her honor from time to time. "Nice face, but already bought and awaiting pickup by Naruto, so what's the point?" That was one of the politer ways most of the boys referred to me. As far as the boys are concerned, I might as well be an 80-year-old regular grandma. The Akimichi girl in the class below us with the burnt face gets more looks than I do. "Sorry Thalia, it's frustrating that no boy will give me the time of day because they already consider me off limits. Unless you've got a brother or a cousin you can summon to Konoha, it looks like I've got no future love life. If that doesn't happen it's spinsterhood for me, or I find a Jinjutsu master skilled enough to make Naruto and I forget who we are long enough for him to knock me up." Thalia did some mental math. Jason would be about 7 right now if she was remembering birthdays correctly and had converted the calendars correctly as well. It wouldn't have surprised Thalia if her math was wrong either way by a couple of months. Still, Thalia would ask her uncle if his kindly ones were looking for an understudy before she let Karen go after Jason as things currently stood. On the other hand, seeing her best friend in such a state didn't sit well with Thalia. The thought quickly came to the half-blood and she said, I don't have any acceptable full siblings. But I'm sure I've got at least one half-sibling or cousin around back in my birth land who'd be acceptable. My father and his brothers do seem to complete for whose face should be in the dictionary next to dirty old man. It would still be up to them if we somehow figured out a way to summon them here, but you would have my blessing for what it's worth. Thalia deliberately avoided thinking about why it would be acceptable in Konoha for Karen to pursue a relationship with a possible brother or cousin of hers, given Karen's situation. That brought up possibilities that Thalia wasn't comfortable considering just yet. Shikaku Nara was wishing he didn't have such a troublesome time placing the newly graduated students. As the Jonin commander, one of his duties was to determine which students would be best for which teams. The Hiruzen classification introduced 2 years ago only made things more time-consuming for Shikaku, even if it did make things easier. All of the graduates were classified as Fotorati until they passed their certifications during the quarterly certification tests for ninja classification. The graduates' class transcripts did indicate which classifications the graduates were aiming to be certified in, so Shikaku could use that as a filter for team selection. For most of the teams, things were just tedious for Shikaku. Match up the files in a solid team with related classifications and then pick a Chunin or Jonin with at least one of those classifications to lead the team. Then Shikaku came to the folder of problems. The elite Jonins who were a cut above most Jonins with reputations that affected how clients and enemies viewed their teams. It was rare for one of them to submit a request for a Genin team, and this year he had 5 such Jonins. Adding to Shikaku's problems was the fact that an unusually large number of standout Genins had earned their way into the Jonin tutelage course. Many of those students, including his own son, were heirs to major ninja clans with potential political ramifications for their Genin teams. Then to top it all off was the Chakra Juggernaut Trinity consisting of Konoha's half-Camus and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Provided enemies didn't identify and eliminate those 3 soon, they would be Konoha's main deterrents in the next couple of years. Arashi's brats really bothered Shikaku. How could he see to their training and protection without tipping the other villages off to the trio's importance? Sticking them in the same squad violated regulations and was making the trio a very tempting target. Moreover, who should teach them and who should be on their teams? Shikaku quickly rejected the idea of Asuma or Kurenai as any of the trio's Jonin instructors. Thanks to his position, Shikaku was privy to Artemis equals Diana's revelations regarding Biju and Kami Chakra. The trio would need instructors who could force them to calm down if they had issues training their other chakras. None on the available instructors had a proven track record of doing such a feat. There were several who should theoretically be able to do so, and Arashi had training on how to make Kami chakra suppressing seals. Could that be reasonably said to be enough? The questions and concerns were getting to be too much for Shikaku. He secured the files in his locked desk drawer, stood up, and walked away from his desk. The team selection was too troublesome. He needed to clear his mind. Shikaku decided that a walk and some fresh air would help clear his head. The Chunin guarding the secure room was informed he was taking a break, and then Shikaku left. There was a brief pause by the stairway as Shikaku passed another guard and headed up to the ground floor of the Hokage Tower. Konoha's normal hustle and bustle helped to muffle Shikaku's heavy thoughts as he let his feet wander through the village. He'd prefer to just relax and watch the clouds with his son, but the noise reminded Shikaku why he allowed himself to be put in such troublesome situations. Every now and then Shikaku would be greeted by polite bows of respect by the civilians. He'd return the bows appropriately even though it was rather troublesome. Shikaku turned a corner and found himself standing at the torii for the Konoha Foundation and Memorial Shrine. This shrine had been built by the Shaddai to commemorate different kami and had connections to the ancestors of different shinobi. It also served as the repository and caretakers of the family shrines of those clans that had sadly died out in Konoha. Most were from civilian clans whose distant branches outside the villages wanted to cut off all ties to the shinobi branch. The Honden and Hayden of the complex was dedicated to the Rakuto Sennin. It was said that they were the first buildings of Konoha constructed by the Shaddai after Madara built the torii for the shrine complex. It was also said that the Honden had the outfit the Rakuto Sennin wore when he made the moon and shrine contributed by the Senjus and the Uchihas when they discovered that each had the other half of the outfit. Shikaku didn't know if the second claim was true, but it wouldn't surprise him. His attention was drawn to the newest sessa added to the complex in the last year. It was the smallest and tucked away in a corner that newbies visiting the shrine wouldn't immediately notice. Especially since this sessa was positioned at a different orientation from the others in the complex. This sessa was positioned to face the full moon at night as it was dedicated to Artemis equals Diana. The thought struck Shikaku and a smile briefly appeared on his face. He made his way to one of the shrine's priests and quickly bought an incense stick and some paper to write a prayer on. Then he made his way to one of the offered table and wrote his custom prayer on the prayer paper. Shikaku made his way over to Artemis equals Diana's sessa. He put the incense in the sessa's burner and lit it while quietly chanting his prayer to the kami his old friends were avatars of in life. When the incense went out, Shikaku folded his prayer up and tied it to the appropriate place. Shikaku was surprised to notice that there were already a number of recent prayers offered to Artemis equals Diana's sessa. There were easily double the number here than at any other sessa in the complex. He walked away from the sessa and headed back to the Hokage Tower. The team selection still needed to be completed. Naruto approached the Kazama household's armory room with trepidation in the pre-dawn light. Today was the day everyone in his class would be sworn into the shinobi forces and given their initial assignments. It would also be the first time he could wear his actual armor instead of the academy uniform. That fact made Naruto a little nervous. Naruto steeled his nerves and opened the armory. Inside the armory were 3 mannequins decked out in armor. Karen's armor was on the right side of the armory and was denoted by the Uzumaki crest on her shield. Dahlia's armor was on the left side of the armory and was denoted by the Aegis replica shield. Both the Aegis replica shield and Belisarius's shield had been modified to add the standard shield seals that Konoha had adopted from the Ashigaru. In between the girl's armor was the mannequin holding up the relic armor of Belisarius that was now Naruto's. The armor was of excellent quality, having been preserved via repairing charm placed on the armor after it entered Diana's possession. The armor also had a sizing charm placed on it so that it would always be a perfect fit for Naruto. However, that was the extent of the magic woven into the armor. Everything else was mortal craftsmanship and ingenuity. Steel was deliberately tinted so that it wouldn't gleam in the sun. This armor's high rank was denoted by excellent craftsmanship. It spoke of a leader who needed to carefully use everything he had, including himself, to the maximum effect. Naruto reverently picked up a piece of the armor and carefully put it on. He put each piece of his armor, one thinking about all of the battles this armor had seen over its decades of service. Once Naruto was in his armor, he began to arm himself, starting with sealing his extra shuriken and ending with putting his sword into his belt scabbard. Naruto double-checked to make sure he had gotten everything he needed from the armory before nodding his head. There were still several vital pieces of equipment he needed to get before the oath swearing. They just weren't here. Now armed, the young shinobi exited the armory and secured it. He quietly walked to the kitchen and grabbed a sealed lunch along with some bread and a thermos full of miso soup. Part of Naruto wished he could stay and wait until the other woke up so they could all have a regular breakfast together. There just wasn't the time if he was to show up at the academy for the oath swearing with everything like he was expected to do. It was a fortunate thing that the academy teachers taught their students who to eat while on the move. By no means was it particularly enjoyable for Naruto. However, he was far from the only person walking the streets of Konoha at this hour while trying to have their breakfast. Naruto finished the last of his soup and sealed the thermos away just as he rounded the corners to the stables. It was then a quick hop and a jog to get to his Pegasus's particular stall. Narcissus greeted Naruto with a brief snort as the gelding woke up. The Pegasus was now fully grown and about the size of a Clydesdale. Kiba's shenanigans involving Narcissus was even more upsetting to the stable hands as Narcissus was bigger than any of his siblings so far. Naruto gently patted the head of his mount and then proceeded to tend to the Pegasus's needs. Naruto could focus on getting Narcissus suited up once all of those chores were accomplished. He had taken courses to be primarily a cataphractary with a secondary as a comitatensis. Narcissus was technically registered as ninja equipment, same as Kiba had to do with Akamaru. The first thing Naruto did was to inspect Narcissus' armor to make sure his partner would be protected. He couldn't be a cataphractary ninja if he lost his Pegasus. Naruto put the armor on his partner once he was satisfied it was in good condition. Narcissus patiently waited for his armor to be placed on as he was trained. The sun had completely cleared the horizon and Konoha's skyline when Naruto led the now armored Narcissus out of his stall. Sunlight did not glisten off of Narcissus' scaled armor, which was tarnished to prevent that from occurring. Naruto quickly locked the stall and then mounted the Pegasus. He urged Narcissus into the sky and the duo took off with a leap. The duo circled the stables twice before flying well above any building in the village. Here and there in the sky Naruto could spot cataphractary ninjas flying patrol routes. Cataphractary operated openly now that there were enough Pegasi. The Clibonary were the same with the unicorns. Naruto urged Narcissus towards the academy and smiled when he spotted the girls walking towards the academy as well. He estimated that they'd get to the academy about 5 minutes after he would arrive. Narcissus gracefully landed on the academy's front lawn and folded his wings. Naruto patted Narcissus on the neck and then got off of his mount. One of the other early arrivals among the new genin cohort slowly approached the duo and nervously spoke. "Oh, Naruto. I didn't know that you had been accepted into the Pegasi Corps already." The turn of his head brought Hinata into Naruto's view. There was a puzzled look on Naruto's face for a second and then he realized what Hinata was talking about. No Hinata, I haven't even sent an application for consideration in that division yet. We have to be at least a chunin with a year of experience under our belts for consideration after all. Narses here was a gift to the Uzumaki clan after that incident during the Pegasus showing in class about 4 years ago. Incident? Curiosity warred with nervousness inside of Hinata. That curiosity and the fear that this might be her last chance in months to talk to Naruto alone gave her the strength to stop any stutter. Such opportunities were rare enough since Naruto was constantly with Hinata's two least favorite classmates. On the previous chances over the past year she had choked and refused to do so now. What incident? You don't recall the incident, Hinata? Oh wait, you were in a different class that year. I'm a bit surprised that you didn't hear about it at the time, given how many people were talking about it. Let's just say that Kiba won the Idiot of the Class award for the year. Narses here was given the Uzumaki since Artemis equals Diana graced Konoha with the Pegasi as an attempt to make up for Kiba's stupid moment. Hinata focused her attention on Narses so that she wouldn't stutter. You said his name is Narses. I don't recognize that name. Is it from the Artemis equals Diana's homelands? After receiving a nod, Hinata continued. Are you planning on being certified as a cataphractary as well as a comitatensis? Naruto smiled a smile that nearly had Hinata shaking in her knees. I'm actually planning on making cataphractary my primary specialization. You were going for preventers and explorators certification in your extra classes, right? I'm pretty sure that Thalia mentioned seeing you in preventers class once or twice in the past. Hearing the foreigner's name cross Naruto's lips felt like someone poured ice down her spine to Hinata. What Naruto saw in that ignorant savage Hinata couldn't see. No, that was a lie her jealousy summoned up and she was aware enough of her faults to realize it. The girl had problems with book learning but excelled at practical shinobi lessons. Hinata could admit from her own fears that Thalia was beautiful, strong, and confident. Traits that she lacked herself that Naruto seemed drawn towards much to her despair. The new voice called out and prevented Hinata from saying anything more. Hey Naruto. Both Naruto and Hinata turned to see Karen waving as she and Thalia walked onto the academy grounds. Naruto replied, good morning girls. I'm glad you came here early. Hinata decided that discretion would be better before her nerves or her jealousy got the better of her. She politely bowed her head and said, I have several other people I need to see before the oath taking. Thank you for a moment of your time Naruto. She then walked away from Naruto keeping the maximum amount of distance she could from Karen and Thalia. Karen saw Hinata's moments and really wished the girl would stop living in a genjutsu. The Hyuga very rarely, as in Karen could probably name them on one hand with fingers to spare if she cared to remember, let branch members marry out of the clan. Even then it was only when the Hyuga in question was without question unable to have children. That never happened with the main family Hyugas. Any marriage to a non-Hyuga by a Hyuga was conditional on the non-Hyuga joining their spouse in the Hyuga clan. A harsh set of clan laws, but common enough among clans with established Kekkei Genkai. Naruto was the Uzumaki clan head and that wasn't going to change for decades at the very least. Uzumaki traditions on marrying outside of the clan were looser than most shinobi clans with the Uzumaki's age and prestige. However, the clan head couldn't marry out of the clan because then he wouldn't belong to the clan he was head of anymore. That was just one of several reasons why Minato left the Namikazes when he and Kushina married. Reality could really suck at times. Karen was well aware of that fact given the social expectations she was under. She also knew that you couldn't keep hoping things will just work out for you and instead you had to work for what you wanted. Hinata would never be able to marry Naruto as things stood. Karen figured that Hinata was just hurting herself pining for an impossible option. It would be better for her, in Karen's opinion, to find a boyfriend that she could possibly marry. Karen's thoughts on Hinata ended when Naruto turned to look at her and Thalia after saying goodbye to Hinata. With a polite smile for her cousin she said, of course we came here early Naruto. Why wouldn't we when we're officially becoming shinobi? You could have stayed with us for breakfast. Naruto shrugged and said, I wanted to make sure everything was just right with Narses here. Besides, if I didn't plan on something going wrong then something would have gone wrong. Both Karen and Thalia chucked at that quip. They then joined Naruto in chatting with different fellow graduates until it came time for the oath taking. At the appointed time, every new genin was lined up on one of the academy training fields where a small stand had been placed. Standing on the stand in full uniform was the Hokage. Hiruzen sternly looked out at the assembled genin. It seemed like he had a good crop this year for new shinobi. Moreover, these shinobi had been trained in and for the reforms he had instituted during his second reign. They were more adaptable and didn't need to unlearn any poor habits like his more senior forces. He nodded his head once. If the kami willed it this group would go far. The Hokage used a jutsu to amplify his voice and said, kneel. As one the shinobi got on bent their knee and placed their right fists on hearts. Hiruzen spoke the oath. Do you swear of your own free will that you will serve Konoha and her shinobi forces? To the Hokage you will be true and faithful, supporting the Hokage's plans and deny support to the Hokage's enemies. That you will obey all lawful orders given to you by your superiors. Disregarding the demands of blood, you will hold your fellow Konoha shinobi higher than you hold your kinsmen. That you will perform your actions in accordance with the Konoha shinobi code and be subject to its rulings. That you will sacrifice your life if the need of Konoha calls upon it. With one voice the assembled genin said, I swear it. Hiruzen then spoke, I Hiruzen Sarutobi the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha accept your oath. From this time forward until I release you, I count you as my sworn soldiers. Rise and receive the badge of your position. Echunin motioned the genin to come up one at a time on the right of the stage. Hiruzen greeted every genin by name thanks to a memorization jutsu he had learned years ago and handed them their forehead protector. Most of the genin were stunned for a second that the Hokage actually knew their names. Another chunin was standing on Hiruzen's other side would help the stunned genin by leading them off the stage. Once off the stage they would head to a chunin who was sitting at a desk behind the stage. There the new genin was handed their official shinobi ID papers and an envelope with their initial orders. From there the genin would go somewhere on the training field to look at their initial orders. Alia's name came up before Naruto or Karen since the kanji for Grace was before the kanji for Uzumaki. She found a decent-sized tree to lean against and opened the orders envelope. Thalia took a moment for focus and then slowly started to read the orders. Several times she stopped to reread parts of the order just to make sure her dyslexia wasn't tricking her. A smile appeared on Thalia's face. She was provisionally assigned Genin Team 6 under Itachi Uchiha's command. Her teammates would be Naruto and Hinata. She and her squad mates were supposed to meet in one of the academy rooms in an hour to meet with their potential instructor. Thalia turned to look at the line of genin getting their forehead protectors and quickly spotted Naruto. She impatiently waited for him to receive his headband and get off the stage. The eager half-blood took off once Naruto had his ID and was receiving his orders. Thalia stopped a couple feet away from him and said, "We're on the same team, Naruto." Naruto was surprised to hear Thalia say that. He quickly opened his orders to confirm what she said for himself. A grin appeared on his face as he looked up to her. "You're right, Thalia. We will be on the same team. Now all we need to do is beat Itachi's preliminary test and we'll be in business." Chapter 7. Naruto shook his head wondering why he felt off. He could feel in his bones that something wasn't right. Why did he feel like that? Team 6 was just doing a simple D rank mission as expected of a fresh genin team. After all, they had only passed their preliminary test a few days or was it weeks ago. Part of Naruto found it strange that he couldn't recall how long he had been on the team at this point. Another part of Naruto seemed to feel that such things were unimportant details. The young shinobi shook his head to try and clear his thoughts. Something caught his eye as he was shaking his head and he turned to look. Naruto saw himself looking at, but not feeling, the moon rising in the clear sky. Such a thing could not be. The moon he saw might not be the moon that his parents controlled on Earth. However, he was still a child of lunar kami and had a strong connection to the moon that had only grown stronger once the connection was known. He always knew where the moon was. Even when the moon wasn't in the sky, Naruto could feel the moon's location in its orbit like his heartbeat. Seeing the moon somewhere he couldn't feel it was fundamentally wrong. Training kicked in as one word rang throughout Naruto's mind. Jinjutsu. Now that Naruto knew he was under the effects of a jinjutsu, he needed to dispel it. Pain wasn't going to work since this jinjutsu was at a far higher level than he'd ever been placed under in training at the academy. How could he tell the difference between real pain and pain simulated by the jinjutsu given its complexity? The academy instructors had mentioned that the alternative to using pain to escape jinjutsu was to alter one's chakra flow so that the jinjutsu couldn't keep its hold on the target. They had mentioned and practiced trying to slow one's chakra flow to a standstill. That wasn't going to work for beans. Naruto had bombed that practical terribly as he had too much chakra to bring it to a standstill, given his comparatively meager chakra control. Uncle Arashi had explained that there was another method to altering chakra flow in order to get out of a jinjutsu. It was rapidly exciting one's chakra flow so that your chakra forced the chakra of the jinjutsu to become dislodged. Most people didn't like it since it wasted a fair amount of chakra for a regular person. Why waste your chakra when a simple control exercise will do the same thing? Could he do it? Naruto hadn't seriously practiced disrupting jinjutsus for months. Naruto only had that particular ninja art covered in his basic classes. Jinjutsu was deemed to have somewhat limited utility for the Kataphractari and Kamitatensa specializations. How Thalia put up with the extra jinjutsu lessons in Preventor's training Naruto couldn't fathom. Naruto resisted the urge to slap himself as he refocused on the task at hand. He will escape this jinjutsu. Naruto knew he had chakra reserves to burn and would escape even if he didn't make it on the first try. He tried to dispel the genjutsu and got nothing. He tried again and still got nothing. Naruto took a moment to calm down and tried again. This time the genjutsu seemed to distort his surroundings a little bit for a second. At least he was on the right track. Again and again Naruto attempted to dispel the genjutsu, and the genjutsu was distorted more before snapping back in place. Finally, on the 7th try, Naruto was able to shatter the genjutsu. Naruto opened his eyes to see himself sitting at a school desk in one of the academy's classrooms. Thalia was sitting 2 desks to his right warily looking around, while Hinata was sitting 2 desks to his left still under a genjutsu. Itachi was sitting at the teacher's desk. He glanced over at Thalia and Naruto before shaking his head slightly. The Jonin said, "Test complete," as he cancelled the genjutsu on Hinata. Thalia spoke up, "What the hell was that, sir? We come in here to join your squad and find out what test we need to do to stay in the Jonin understudy program, only be hit with a doozy of a genjutsu that completely messes with us." Itachi gave Thalia a firm look as he spoke. "Wait for your comrade to recover and then I will explain." Once Hinata had shaken off the effects of the genjutsu, Itachi explained. Each Jonin looks for slightly different qualifications out of their potential students. Most prefer to look for some level of physical training so that they don't have to focus on that aspect of teaching. There is a minority of Jonins who prefer to focus on the mental aspects of their students. For example, Jonin Haddock focuses on his students' ability to work as a team under pressure. I am among the camp that prefers to look for mental qualities. The academy base is solid enough, and anyone who has made it through the academy has shown the ability to physically grow stronger if they wish to do so. You 3 were placed under a strong genjutsu so that I could test how you would handle a certain situation in a relatively safe manner. Naruto spoke up, "But we never got to whatever situation you wanted to test us on. Thalia and I realized we were under a genjutsu and broke free." "Correct, Naruto," Itachi replied, "none of you were able to undergo the primary goal of my test. However, you did complete the secondary goals of realizing you were in a genjutsu and then escaping it. Naruto, you deserve congratulations for being the first to realize you were under a genjutsu. Thalia, you are to be congratulated for escaping the genjutsu the quickest after realizing you were under it." Hinata looked down at her desk in dismay. She hadn't realized she was under a genjutsu at all. Itachi turned to the heiress and said, "Do not be dismayed at your inability to realize that you were under a genjutsu. I approached several of you clansmen and requested their help in crafting that genjutsu so that you wouldn't realize you were under it for the test." Itachi then turned to Naruto and asked, "Would you mind telling me what alerted you to being in a genjutsu?" I had anticipated Thalia being the first to discover what I was doing given her extra training in genjutsu. Although she figured things out faster than I anticipated, her discovering the test is not nearly as surprising to me as you, Naruto. Naruto looked at his possible sensei and asked, "Why do you want to know, sir?" "It's not to try and redo this test if that is what you're concerned about, Naruto. That particular genjutsu is rather tiring to cast multiple times and far harder to pull off once the target is alert. Besides, why would I force you 3 to redo a test that you have already passed by completing the secondary objectives? Yes, Hinata was still under the genjutsu when I declared the test complete, but can either of you honestly say that you wouldn't help your comrades escape a genjutsu?" As to why I want to know, the answer to that is simple, Naruto. I like to use genjutsu when I can. It is a very useful tool to take out many enemies without using large amount of chakra or attracting attention. However, using genjutsu effectively requires the caster to not make it seem like they're using genjutsu most times. I want to know what clued you in on the fact that you were in a genjutsu so that I don't repeat the mistake again against a target that must be fooled by genjutsu. Part of Naruto was still shocked that a Jonin was asking him this. Another part of him was nervous because his escape was connected to his status as a half-blood, which he was supposed to keep quiet on. He then said, "I could feel that the moon wasn't in the correct place when I spotted it in the genjutsu." Itachi nodded his head and said, "That would make some sense. The kami your parents serve is associated with the moon, and that kami did declare herself as your patron a few years ago during an academy exhibition. I suppose that you knowing the location of the moon instinctively is a way for Artemis equals Diana to remind you of her claim on you. Thank you for informing me of this, Naruto. I am happy to know that my mistake in crafting the genjutsu for your trial was due to a rather unique trait of yours that I didn't know existed or considered." Itachi gave Naruto a slight nod of respect, surprising the Genin trio. The Jonin turned to look at the trio after he finished his nod. "Let this be my first lesson to all of you as your Jonin instructor. Always be learning and never be afraid to ask for help in expanding your abilities. When you do learn something from someone, always show them the proper respect owed for teaching you. It did not matter in this instance that I am Naruto's instructor and his superior in both rank and experience. He taught me something I did not know, and that might, even if the situation is unlikely, save my life on a future mission. Now then, starting tomorrow we will meet up at 8 o'clock sharp at training ground 6. For the first week we will spend the first 4 hours of our day doing a mix of team and individual exercises. This is so we all can get used to working as a team and to give you 3 some more training. We will then have an hour for lunch and relaxation. After lunch, we will spend the next 4 hours teaching codes and other military secrets you are now privy to as genin. Once those 4 hours are up you will have the rest of the day to yourselves. After the first week our schedule will change even though the start time and location will remain the same. For the rest of the month, we will operate with 2 days a week dedicated to performing missions and 3 days for training. The training composition will depend on your improvements and your specializations. Missions will be D rank, with the possibility of us getting in some extra training if you 3 can complete your missions quickly. In the following month we will switch to having 3 days a week dedicated to performing missions and 2 days for training. It is my expectation that the 3 of you will be ready by the start of your second full month as genin to be ready for a C rank mission. Are there any questions? The trio of genin looked at each other and shook their heads. Naruto then spoke for them. None, sir. Itachi nodded his head. Very well, students. You are dismissed. The next morning Team 6 meet at their assigned training ground at the specified time. Itachi put the trio through an hour of various exercises to warm them up for the day. He then said, we will start today's training with a series of spars. Thalia and Hinata, you will be up first for the spars. Please present the equipment that you wish to use in the spar to me, not counting your armor. This is so I can apply a series of training seals on your weapons so that you can spar without worrying about killing each other. Hinata went first and presented Itachi with a pouch of shuriken and a pair of kunai. Itachi pulled out a series of ribbons and placed them on all the items shown. He then returned them to Hinata. Thalia then presented her yari, her sword, her backup knife, a small set of shuriken for her shield, and an additional pouch of shuriken. Itachi again made sure that everything had a training seal on before returning the equipment to Thalia. He then said, assume the correct pacing for sparing genin. There was a brief pause as the duo got into position. Itachi continued, I want this to be clear to both of you. There will be times when sparing will be done in the traditional manner for training purposes regarding your techniques. Other times sparing will be done in a no-holds-everything-goes manner to see how you do in simulated life and death struggle. This spar is one of the latter. You two will fight until one of you scores what would be a crippling hit on the other, is that understood? Both Thalia and Hinata turned to look at Itachi. Thalia firmly nodded her head while Hinata nodded with a bit of nervousness. Itachi called out, begin. Hinata opened up by throwing some shuriken at Thalia. These were casually blocked by Thalia's shield before she used the shield's inbuilt jutsu to send a wave of fear down Hinata's spine. Thalia followed by a stab with her yari to Hinata's armpit. Itachi called out, match. Victory to Thalia. Now, gather your equipment and resume your starting positions. The girls did as they were instructed. They did 2 more quick matches under Itachi's order. Each match ended quickly with Thalia scoring a crippling hit on Hinata with her yari. After Hinata's third defeat, Itachi said, come here you 3. He looked at his genin and said, it seems that we need to go over some basic combat facts. Naruto, what was Hinata's primary flaw causing her to lose her matches against Thalia? Hinata looked down in shame as Naruto scratched his head. I don't know, sensei. Her taijutsu seemed good to me. I mean, I don't know much about the gentle fist. But it seemed that Hinata was doing the forms correctly. Itachi nodded his head slightly, accepting Naruto's answer. Let me enlighten you, Naruto. Hinata's primary flaw that crippled her in the match against Thalia was that she used taijutsu. Do not misunderstand me, you 3. Taijutsu is a vital art for shinobi and rightly deserves its place in the primary trinity of shinobi arts. However, taijutsu is a tool for a shinobi to use, and one should always use the appropriate tool at the appropriate time and place. Let's consider the matches that the girls just had. The 2 of you fought in a clearing on a bright day with no form of terrain cover whatsoever. Not counting the blade, the yari gives Thalia 2 meters of additional reach. There is also Thalia's shield to consider. It is something vital to consider even if we disregard its powerful genjutsu that Thalia could have activated at a moment's notice. Her shield provides a great defense and acts as a secondary weapon for her to use. Then there is the armor that Thalia is wearing. The Gentle Fist is an amazing taijutsu style that enables its user to quickly neutralize, capture, or even kill enemies. Attacks against the chakra network are not something to joke about and are not something that someone can just build resistance to having done to them. However, it has its weaknesses like everything in this world. First, Hinata or any Hyuga has to reach their target. I know that the Gentle Fist has some range attacks in it like other taijutsu styles. However, those are high-tier jutsus that take years if not decades to master for someone learning the style, and the access to them is quite restricted. Do you know any of those techniques, Hinata? Hinata shook her head and said, no, sensei. Privately, Hinata wondered if she would ever be good enough to even be shown the scrolls those moves were written on. Itachi nodded his head as he continued. Knowing that you have that limitation, Hinata, you should have reconsidered your approach to the spar. As I said, the first limitation of Taijutsu for non-masters is that you have to touch the target to attack. I've seen all of your sprinting scores from the academy. None of you three are even close to being fast enough to even think of attacking someone who is armed while you are barehanded. Weapons were invented for a reason. Those 2 meters of additional reach gives Thalia a great chance to cripple or kill an attacker in your situation, Hinata, as you just demonstrated. Then you have her shield, which keeps you away from her body. A hard taijutsu style like the Goken can provide some help here by forcing Thalia to deal with concussive energy from hits to her shield. Even then, the Goken user is typically hurting themselves more than they would someone in Thalia's position. Some masters break this rule. However, they are a tiny minority like Might Guy, who specializes in using jutsus to enhance his body's toughness and durability, along with his strength. Finally, there is the armor that the two of you are wearing. It is primarily focused on defending against cutting attacks. However, it does offer some protection from chakra attacks. I know that it takes more chakra to go through steel than it does to send chakra through silk or cotton. The exact amount I don't know, Hinata. I would suggest you talk with your clan members about how much more chakra they have to put into their strikes in order to deal with armor. I do know that just the basic amount of chakra would have been ineffective in this fight, even if you had somehow landed a hit on Thalia. Hinata felt 2 centimeters tall at that point. Here was her first chance to impress both Naruto and Itachi with what skills she had, and she totally blew the opportunity. Worse for her was the fact that she messed up so badly against Thalia. I'm sorry for being such a disappointment, sensei. Itachi immediately cut his student off. You are not a disappointment, Hinata. You are a fresh genin, which means you and your teammates are inexperienced. Part of being inexperienced is that you do not always know the appropriate times to use your abilities in the correct setting. I have seen your clansmen clear out entire compounds using the gentle fist without raising a single alarm by themselves on missions before. I've seen them use the gentle fist to cause a target to have a delayed spasm so that they were run over by a cart in crowded crossway, so everyone thought that the death was just a tragic accident. You all will have that level of skill if you work for it. I guarantee that. On the second week after formation, Itachi led Team 6 to the Hokage Tower towards the mission assignment section early in the morning. Itachi walked up to the counter and said, I would like a mission for my genin team. The Chunin manning the mission desk looked up and said, about time you got here, Itachi. Your team is the very last of the new genin teams to show up for a mission request. Even Jonin Haddock, as shocking as it is for him to have a genin team, took a mission for his team before you, and he's infamously late. Itachi looked at the Chunin and said, we all run our teams as we see fit, Ryoma. I simply see it as practical to make sure that my genin are ready to represent the village well when on their mission. Even if their mission is a simple D rank in the village. Besides, there is plenty of material that new genin need to learn quickly, and I focused our training on that first. Ryoma shook his head, material that genin aren't expected to have memorized until after their second month of being active. I shouldn't be surprised that you decided to have your students focus on that. You always were the overachiever in class and always focused on getting assignments done ahead of schedule. I suppose that's why you're the hotshot jonin while I'm merely a desk chunin. Perhaps, Itachi stated in a non-committal tone as he looked at his old genin teammate. He then continued, what missions do you have available for new genin teams? The chunin looked down at his list for the day and frowned. I'll be honest, Itachi. Today is not the best day to come in for a mission request as a leader for a green genin team. Most mission requests currently on the books need at least one Velite level classification in a classification besides Foderati in order to be accepted. The usual pile of requests for green genin have been down this month for some reason. Most of the other missions on the books for genin have been earmarked by my superiors for punishment detail. I can put you in for a mission type reservation if you want. As a new genin team you would have priority on reservation list. Naruto, Thalia and Hinata all looked nervously at their teacher. They did not like the way this conversation was going. They knew from Itachi that their first set of missions would not be big and important missions. This sounded bad even for what they were expecting in their minds. That nervous feeling got even worse when Itachi gave the trio a speculative look. Itachi turned back to Ryoma and said, what's the worst mission you've got for newbies that hasn't been earmarked for punishment detail? I think a practical example of why the shinobi career isn't all sunshine and roses is in order. You take after sensei too much, Itachi. Paying it forward, I'm just paying it forward, Ryoma. Now can I have a look at the mission list? Ryoma handed Itachi the list of available missions, much to the dread of the shinobi students. Itachi looked at the list for a minute and then smiled. He pointed to one mission and said, my team will take care of that mission. Ryoma looked at the mission and shook his head. I know you don't pull any punches, Itachi. But damn, that mission is just rough for newbies. Okay, I'll mark the Team 6 is tackling that mission. Ryoma did as he said while Itachi led his team away. Messing with the newbies was one of the perks of this job, and Ryoma thought that Itachi was enjoying that perk just a bit too much. Itachi led his confused and worried genin out of the Hokage Tower without saying a word. The trio followed behind their sensei wondering what mission they were on and just how bad was it. Naruto spoke up. What's our mission? That is a surprise, Naruto. You will often find in your career that you will need to react to surprises and unexpected situations. Consider this a practical training exercise. I will inform you all about our mission when we get there. I will expect you all to act professional and not let on that you will be finding out about the mission from the client. All three genin promptly replied that they understood their sensei. They were all wondering what their very first mission was going to be and wanted to get started doing their jobs. Their curiosity and worry only increased as Itachi led them towards the industrial sector of Konoha and into the area farthest from the residential areas. Finally, Team 6 arrived at a large slaughterhouse. Itachi led them to the entrance and spoke to the man at the entrance. Team 6 here to fulfill the mission request sent in. The store guard looked up and said, well, that was quick. We only sent the request off a little over an hour ago. I'll get Kiichi so that he can show you where you'll be working. The guard entered the slaughterhouse and came out a minute later with a man wearing a bloody apron that was wiping his hands. Both Thalia and Hinata were surprised that the man whom they presumed to be Kiichi was wearing a somewhat fancy kimono more suited for office work under his apron. Kiichi bowed politely to Itachi and said, thank you for accepting my mission so quickly. Several of my workers have come down with a cold and cannot work. As you can see by my state, my business is rather short-handed at the moment. Ataki would be in helping us with the shipment of calves we just got if I didn't need him to man the front. Besides, a shipment of lambs is supposed to come in today and I need Ataki to let us know when they arrive. I understand, sir. However, I would like to clarify that the mission request only listed that you needed additional manpower for the day. It did not specify the precise manpower you needed. We are at your disposal, but I would advise against putting us to work at anything requiring finesse or skill in your trade. The manager of the slaughterhouse nodded his head as he listened to Itachi. I expected as much when I filled out the simple mission form instead of the expanded mission request form. Couldn't afford the extra time for filling it out with the back orders, and we couldn't wait for a ninja with knowledge of being a butcher to become available. I can shift the apprentices currently on duty to cover processing the cheaper and the rough cuts. They will need the experience anyway for their certification. How comfortable and competent are your genin with knives? They've been fully trained the basics of knife handling. Good to hear, sir. If you will come right this way, I can put you all on putting the calves down. A single cut across the throat is all you'll need to cut the main artery and the windpipe. Please make the cuts quick and deep so the animals are extinguished quickly. This is a meat processing facility after all. There's no need to put the animals in extra stress or pain from a sloppy cut or multiple cuts. Thalia dryly interjected, I take it some of your regular employees didn't do too well on job their first day. Kiichi nodded his head and looked at Thalia. It tends to happen among those who grow up in the village. Konoha is called a village, but you have to remember that it has a very large population. Villages far smaller than Konoha have petitioned and gotten city charters from the daimyo. We're still a village because of being the main center of the Hokage's Han. Most people who live in Konoha have little contact with animal husbandry and some of the more unpleasant parts of food processing. Naruto bluntly cut in, what you're saying is that most people are squeamish when faced with killing animals to process them for food. Itachi nodded his head, that is what our client is saying. Sadly, that is something that many urban dwellers have problems with at first. Part of the reason why I selected this mission for the three of you is that you and Hinata are behind Thalia when it comes to desensitization training, even if I would have preferred her to get it from less dire circumstances. Missions like this will help you all prepare for some of the easier C-rank missions of wild predator hunting. I expect all three of you to spend equal time holding the butcher's blade. Team 6 silently followed Kiichi into one of the larger rooms in his slaughterhouse. Inside were several dozen calves in small pens with a small area in one corner for the processing. Kiichi showed Team 6 where the butcher supplies were kept and then got a calf to demonstrate what the team needed to do. Hinata looked a little green as she looked at the carcass as Kiichi calmly cleaned his knife before putting the carcass on a conveyor belt. Then he hit a button which caused the belt to activate and pull the carcass to a flap-covered hole in the wall. And there is the rough processing room where the regulars and I will be getting these carcasses rendered for butchers to make the precise cuts their customers want. If you can please complete the calves processing by noon so we can clean this room up before the lambs arrive. Does anyone have any questions? Thalia perked up, are there any store discounts on bulk meat purchases? Those calves look tasty in Jayakatsu and quickly become a favorite meal here in Konoha for Thalia. Her comments got her a hesitant nod of agreement from Naruto and a slightly disturbed look from the still queasy Hinata. Itachi kept himself from reacting while Kiichi shook his head with a slight smile. With his job explained, Kiichi quickly left to rejoin his employees in the next room. Itachi spoke up, "You have been given your task from the client with an explanation of how you are to accomplish it and a preferred time limit for success. Thalia and Naruto, I want you two to secure the calves for processing. Hinata, you will have first use of the knife for butchering." Itachi looked at his queasy student, not allowing himself to show any hint of the concern he felt for her. The shinobi life was rough to those who couldn't manage their emotions and properly draw on their inner strength. He wanted to delay and ease his students into the worst parts of the shinobi life as much as he could. But some things could only be eased into so much before one had to take a major step in the process and then deal with the consequences. This was the best Itachi could do on this part of the shinobi career. At least his students would be starting with animals they were unattached to, instead of being thrown into a life or death battle like he had been. What if Naruto was half-blood ninja and Percy Jackson? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.